It's always got to load the stream. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Pancake Parlay, episode 65. I'm your host, the Don, and as always, I'm with my friend, Chowders. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm good, Don. How are you?
I'm going good. We're obviously going to be talking about some finales going on. We're going to talk about a cancellation as well. We're also going to talk about some DC stuff because, that's what we do most of the time here. But first, as we were mentioning before, we're going to be talking about the Game of Thrones Season 8, or like series finale, basically, Episode 6, which is just called the Iron Throne. This is the finale for Game of Thrones. And yeah, I'm one of those people, like, I don't know. I'm very... there's hard words to talk about this finale and I guess describing Game of Thrones, because I think Game of Thrones has been kind of a part of, I guess, my culture for 10 plus years. It's been on TV. I was there at the start watching the show since episode 1 because I heard about it. It sounded really cool. I got hooked on the first episode, started reading the books, and then kept them shoving this show to everyone's face up until like midway, probably through season 2. That's when people started to catch on about this show. And
Mm.
I've been kind of championing it kind of ever since. But obviously, since once it, I think, kind of hit that pinnacle mainstream appeal, I think things slightly changed for Game of Thrones, and obviously they didn't have a lot of material, and it changed. So at the current moment, this is the
Well,
finale of the series as we know it, because the books aren't finished yet.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I didn't watch Game of Thrones from the beginning. I started watching from season three, I believe. I think season three is the season that has the red wedding,
It's
correct?
one of those 10
Um,
twisters. Yes, that's great.
yeah, yeah, and it's a very like iconic season, and that episode in particular is a very iconic moment. Yeah, I kind of got onto it because I'm a pretty big fan of like fantasy as like a genre. But then on top of that, it definitely is a kind of a deconstruction of your typical fantasy genre. It's not it's good guys versus bad guys, but also there's a lot of gray in between. You don't really know who the good guys are, and even the people who you think are good and doing good things, they don't necessarily get rewarded for that kind of thing. It kind of set the new standard for what would be modern television as well, given that prior to Game of Thrones, like kind of high budget event style TV wasn't really like that kind of a mainstream kind of uh, you know common thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it definitely set the bar in regards to having like great acting talent, great costume design, sound, and just overall just kind of quality. Although, like you said, like it did start to get popular, but I think the issue with the show itself is that it started to deviate purely because after season 4, it started to rely less on the source material, more so because of the lack of books to draw inspiration from. And ultimately, I think that is what kind of ended up sinking the ship that was Game of Thrones. But a little bit before we kind of get into that, I wanted to just kind of go back to talk about a little bit about last episode, which was known as the Bells. Now, on the official Game of Thrones subreddit, they have a post episode survey, and for episode 5, actually beat the new record, having over 130,000 respondents. The average score that this episode got was 6.3, which I believe is one of the lowest scores that a Game of Thrones episode had.
I think before this
Um,
season, the lowest there ever was the Dawn episode in like season
Yeah, the sand
6.
snakes.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
when
believe
they're in
so.
prison and all that. Yeah,
And yeah, it's a really lame. It's a really lame episode in which nobody. It felt like like a filler season almost. You know what I
hmm
mean? And especially given it was on the heels of season 4, which is when you actually had the introduction of like Oberyn fighting the Mountain. You had like Tyrion on trial. There's all this really really cool stuff happening in season 4. Also, Joffrey dying.
yeah,
Spoilers.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
by the way, spoilers for Game of Thrones if we haven't, if it wasn't already clear.
Yeah. Well,
So
I think if anyone listens to our thing, it's like we spoil stuff like straight out the bat. I feel like for some people, if they don't say spoilers in the title, they just get really angry. But I just don't care. Like it's just like you've been warned. Like if you want to have a discussion, like if you want to watch it or not watch it when you're in season 8, I don't know what you're doing. You know, like
yeah, I mean, look, it's a courtesy thing. I can definitely understand people getting spoiled by things, especially when they're not like prepared for them. I know there's definitely probably a market for people who want like hype for an episode, right? But you're not going to get that from this podcast, I don't think. I don't think there was a lot of hype for it. But one of the other questions that were asked was Daenerys Targaryen justified in her actions during the episode The Bells? And 86% of people said no, it wasn't, whereas only 14% said yes. Another question was, do you think Daenerys burning King's Landing to the ground? Should she do it, or do you want her to do it, even if it risks the deaths of innocent? 57 said no. That's actually a lot lower than I thought.
mm-hmm.
Another question was, which of the 2 battle episodes listed below has been your favorite? Battle of the Bastards having a 79% and the Battle for King's Landing 21%. I think that was no way that wasn't a competition even remotely.
Yeah, that shouldn't even be a question, to be honest with you.
It is really weird. You know what? I'm gonna ask you what a question I want to see what you say versus the audience. So, question 4 is: should Jon Snow have told his family about his Targaryen heritage? Yes or no?
Uh, I feel like John is always been kind of like the kind of purest of heart characters and never really keeps lies. So like obviously I think like yeah he should have told his family. So yeah.
Yeah, well, you're with the majority of people there, 75%. I remember when I did this a question that I also picked yes. Another question is, what do you think Daenerys should have done when she found out Varys was scheming? First decision is had him executed, um, imprisoned him, exiled him, or pardoned him.
Ugh. Hmm. I feel like he should have been like excommunicated almost. So he just out of the
So
loop.
exiled.
Yeah, exiled. Yeah. I don't know because yeah, Daenerys is just I feel like what the previous season she that's when she started to get kind of really aggressive when she started killing people.
Mhm.
So it's kind of in a character almost, but at the same time, like I feel like it would have probably been a better way to just excommunicate instead of killing everyone who did you wrong. So yeah, that.
Mm. Well, you fall into the 50% category with exile, whereas a majority had agreed that he should have been executed, and I also agree with that too. Purely just because, like, if you're in the same shoes as Daenerys, like any kind of dissent, especially from your, I think he was known as like her Master of Shadows, right? That's kind of how that works, correct?
Well, yeah, he had the ravens and everything. Basically, the whole thing is like he just knows everything all the time, and he just basically
With his
just
little birds.
yeah, he's little birds and everything like that. So like yeah, he does his thing.
All right, so on a scale to 0 to 10, how satisfied were you about Clegane Ball?
Uh, 0 to 10. I'd say probably about a 6. Like, and I think that's purely,
Six.
I think that's purely because of the music and the visuals that were in there. I think the fight in it of itself was really bad, but I feel like the
Mhm.
visuals and like the heat of the moment, it was like kind of very fantasy like, and I felt like that was a pretty good scene, but like the fight could have been better. So
Yeah, yeah. I think I'd probably fall around there. I think the average person gave it a 7.1. Another well, I'll kind of give you um the stats for these because this is just kind of a bit of a joke
mm-hmm.
question. But which of these death scenes do you think was the best of the episode? There's the Mountain versus the Hound. Qyburn got a 33% for his death
All
scene.
right,
They have Jamie and Cersei at 16%, showing a bunch of bricks, and that's it.
Jesus,
Um, and yeah, there's a couple of other things. Have you read A Song of Ice and Fire books? And 51% have said they haven't read any of the main five books. 51%.
hmm.
That just goes to show that like a lot of people, whereas the people who read all five books were 27%, and people who read some were 22%. So it's kind of interesting to see how people felt about the demographics of who are watching Game of Thrones as a whole.
Could you repeat those numbers again?
Yeah, so 51% hadn't read any of the books.
Yeah, so like a half. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you have 27% who have read all five main books,
Mm-hmm.
and 22% um, only read some of the main five books. Funnily enough, the ones who uh, didn't read any of the books actually gave the higher average for the rating of the episode at 6.5%, whereas people who read all five of the books gave it the lowest rating at 5.5.
Yeah,
So
I can say that because I think I'm in that majority. Where like I've read the books, and yeah, there's a lot of things probably missing. There's a lot of cool things that could have happened. There's a lot of characters, a lot of extra detail that very much could have been in this show. But it's kind of like they build up all these like little small like side stories, but they don't even touch upon it in game in the TV show. So it very much feels like it's kind of empty almost. Like, for example, they tease like a whole with the direwolves, they tease a whole direwolf army of direwolves, and it's one of those like cool
mhm.
things, learning Stoneheart and things like that. They they do have all these things, but we don't get to see any of it.
We didn't get to see him.
Yeah, so it's got a little bit of
Yeah, well,
disappointment because there's extra detail, therefore meaning you get disappointed. So of course,
it's really interesting because even I fall into that 51% majority, and I also would not give that episode a 6.7. The writing was given a average of 4.9 out of 10. Although people do think that the episode was well shot with an average of 8.6 out of 10.
yeah, I feel
Um,
like that's the one thing about Game of Thrones that generally they always get right. I feel like it's always shot at least beautifully, or at least done in a way where the lighting's good or the cinematography is good. Especially for the last episode, obviously. Not so much for the third battle in the third episode, but that's a completely different take.
yeah. Um, Maisie Williams and Lena Headley Headey were given best lead performances with 22% and 21% respectively. And as for supporting actors, The Hound was given a 47% for best performance, and uh, Conless Hill, who plays Varys, had 25%.
Hmm.
And probably the most interesting part is how the rating of how many people in one word to describe this episode and what people thought. Number one had disappointing 7,206 people.
Mm,
And so that's pretty substantial. And I
that's a
think the
solid
average,
number.
yeah, and I think the average these people gave, yeah, actually, I'm not really sure. It has a 4.2 number. I don't know what that means. Number two is bad. Number three is shit. Number four, fire. Five, meh. Six, rush. Seven, epic. Eight, sad. Nine, Dracarys.
Mm,
And 10, mad. So that's the stats for episode 5. And I think, especially with our conversation about the episode last week, it'd be interesting to see what they say about the current episode, which I kind of felt was really rushed.
Yeah,
Um,
I feel like
eh,
that's the main problem I had with it.
yeah, exactly. And to just kind of get into the meat of it, we're kind of met with you know John and the gang kind of like dealing with the aftermath of all the damage in King's Landing, and he manages to catch up and see all the Unsullied capturing a bunch of the I guess Lannister army.
The King's Landing army. It wouldn't be
Yeah,
the
the King's
Golden
Landing
Company because they all
army.
died. So it's like basically
Yeah,
the King's
yeah.
Landing.
Well, yeah, I was going to say like the Westeros army. I don't know what to really call them, but yeah, like the Lannister army. Um, and like you had Grey Worm like ready to execute them. And John kind of like stops him before he does it, and you kind of see like everybody's reacting to it, and it could have kind of ended in a big fight, but obviously, John's like, it's not a battle worth fighting for, and it was kind of cool to kind of see like in the background, like as he's walking, Grey Worm just like immediately like goes ahead and starts like slicing the throats of like the soldiers there and there, and it kind of shows once again it's kind of the cool thing that with Game of Thrones that they do kind of show the brutality of the world here and there, but I kind of feel like that was missing from this season and maybe some of the other seasons
Oh
of just
yeah,
how
it's
cruel the
very
world
very much
can
so.
be.
Yeah, I feel like
And
they
and,
they
and I say
sometimes they
that,
do, sometimes they don't.
and I see the irony in saying that while being very kind of what the fuck about all the stuff that happened in the previous episode. I think the difference here is it's quite realistic again and quite organic that Grey Worm does take it to that extreme, and it's very common for a lot of armies to kill off, fighting adult aged men during times of war because they basically posed threats to the invading army and their population when they're taking over certain tribes or groups of people. So it's very much realistic. Danny going on a I don't know a fire rampage because I don't know she saw the Red Keep and got really angry, which is the official explanation by I don't know Dumb and Dumber, also known as D and D.
It's not even that, but it's like even like later in the episode, John tries to justify stuff, but he's like, she saw her best friend get killed. I'm like,
Yeah,
okay,
they try and add all this kind of stuff in. But yeah, the other thing that happens is Tyrion goes to search for Jaime and Cersei in the underground area of the Red Keep, and uncovers them very quickly. But they seem to be in the one place in this large, massive cavern that managed to like they got caved in, whereas there's heaps of other places that didn't have bricks to fall on top of them. It seemed very much like, dude, just like hide off in like a little bit off to the right.
just a
Kind of
bit.
seemed really. I think there's a lot of people quite upset about the death of Cersei at the hands of bricks.
Yeah, well,
Um,
that's the thing. My whole disappointed. Even the way to go is kind of a dumb way to go, but I think it's mostly just it's just like Cersei didn't really do anything this season at all. She just stood there menacingly, didn't
no,
do anything, and then barely any dialogue. It's like I think she must have been filming something else because she only had like probably like a few pages of dialogue for the whole season, and that was it. She really didn't do much. Even just a side note, same with Jon Snow in this season. He really didn't do much either, like talking wise. He's kind of a
yeah, I
side
mean he
character.
kills shit. He kills shit, and that's about. He gives it an inspiring speech
I
here
don't
and
want
there,
the
but
throne. You're my
I don't want the
queen.
throne.
It's always the three like the
You're
lines
my
basically.
queen. Yeah, you're right. You're not wrong. It definitely does sound like a bit of a uh you know uh broken record there. But yeah, we kind of continue viewing everyone, and there's a scene. He's finally going to get to Cersei, sorry, not Cersei, Daenerys, and she's like riding the dragon, and she comes out, and you can see the dragon wings kind of like dramatically up in the air behind her as it goes to flap out. Again, it's this thing that seems to happen with Game of Thrones this season, where they're attempting to give all these cool visual quirks, like, oh yeah, look, she's got wings like a dragon because she's the mother of dragons. But it's at the expense. It's like aesthetics at the expense of story and good writing and character development of 8 years in the making, right? It's like, who cares about this thing? Like, kind of actually, like, although that being said, she does give a pretty an excellent speech,
Yeah,
which I do
very,
kind of find
very.
funny because John later says, "Yeah, the war is over," and Tyrion, knowing a little bit of Dothraki or whatever, is like, "Do you actually think it's over?" And it's like, I kind of realized, oh yeah, John probably doesn't understand Dothraki, so that entire conversation and that entire speech, he's just thinking, "Oh yeah, cool, they're done." I can kind of definitely imagine John being quite like innocent and not knowing the further plans
It's
of
like everyone's just gonna stop, right? Right? Like,
right, guys. But it was, I kind of like that Tyrion, kind of took, got rid of his pin and just like threw it on the ground. That
yeah,
was
I
like,
think, I think if you're gonna hail any of the episode, I feel like that scene and those scenes is probably the best part of this episode. Basically with the kind of like all her unsullied troops in front of everyone. Kind of the really good visuals of just the castles and everything burning, and having that whole like exchange between Tyrion and Daenerys, and like the whole thing of like throwing the pin in this very like obviously very cinematic way, and everyone just stops and goes silent. Like I feel like that is a very good cinematic thing that they did. So I'm like, yeah, that was pretty good in the episode.
I think consistently throughout Game of Thrones, um, there's been some high quality acting by a lot of the actors in the show. Um, but I think Peter Dinklage definitely seems to be like the most consistent and the most emotionally impactful character when he's like in a scene.
No, he's very
And
much an MVP basically of the whole show.
yeah, which is a pretty big deal given that yeah, to be fair, I haven't seen anything by Peter Dinklage prior to this. But the fact that he is somebody who suffers from a condition such as dwarfism, but is able to use that for the purpose of Game of Thrones and play this character that you can both like love, hate, sympathize, empathize with, and watching him go on his journey all throughout the 8 seasons, like regardless of how everything's kind of ended. I think that it's kind of cool. He kind of did seem like the kind of character who would be someone who survives the Game of Thrones, given his role throughout the series as like this master planner.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, he throws down the pin, and he gets arrested by Daenerys is obviously not very happy about it. And yeah, and I don't know, Sansa and John like see each other for a little bit, and it's kind of like whatever. Um, and yeah, he has a conversation. John has a conversation with uh, Tyrion, and you know they kind of have a discussion about, oh, things need to be done in order to protect the realm, which is kind of like a subtle hint of kill Daenerys, which I think is what everybody kind of expected was going to happen this episode. I thought it'd be a little bit more dramatic. I thought, he was going to get into a big fight with Grey Worm, and
Yeah,
that
I
was
feel
going to
like
be
they were building up the
cool.
Grey Worm thing a lot, where I'm just like he's a big player now, and like he should be he's getting up there where there's gonna be some sort of betrayal. Doesn't happen really, but yeah.
No, not really. And yeah, we kind of have a scene where Daenerys is, finally at the throne in King's Landing, which, by the way, very confusing, whether or not things were either ash or snow. right?
I think that was
It's
the whole thing
very
of like her flashback in like season 3, 4,
two.
whatever it was, and it's like yeah, it's
Yeah.
Ash instead of the snow, which you know, keeping with the symbolism, I suppose they pretty much at least
Yeah,
they kind
no,
of
no,
nailed that.
no. That's fine. Like I kind of expected, like, oh yeah, like it's definitely Ash because she bent down the building. But the thing is, like the way everything kind of looked like, you couldn't tell. Like there was like, you had a Drogon or whatever, like underneath all this ash, um, and just kind of erupts out as John kind of walks past it, being a fellow Targaryen that the dragon's supposed to respect, right?
Mm.
Um, and Danny and John have this conversation about, oh, the future is going to be hard, but if you're by my side, everything will be
If
okay,
we
and
just turn it
you
to
know,
fascist people, we should be
we'll,
okay. You know, I get to decide what's good.
yeah, exactly. And the thing is, okay, this is the most disappointing part. They kind of have this scene where it kind of goes back and forth between John and Danny, and you kind of hear the hug and hear like something stab someone. Um, but for me, it was very confused because were they trying to make us think that maybe Danny was trying to trick John, and that Danny was trying to stab John? Like, is that the reason why they didn't show who got stabbed until this like really really dumb dramatic moment where, oh, like she falls out and, oh, like you know she's been stabbed? Like, come on.
I don't know. To me, I was kind of thinking like, if they were trying to do the whole like, because I'm like, it's too obvious. So I'm like, okay, maybe they actually did kill John, and we were gonna keep with Daenerys. Like I thought that because I'm just like, maybe they're gonna go really hardcore, and this is why apparently people didn't
That would have
like
been
this
more
episode.
interesting. That would have been more interesting if they had
But
done that.
then,
But no.
because that's the thing, it's like this whole trope of people being in love, getting stabbed when they kiss, is very much it very much isn't a trope of itself. And Game of Thrones is the whole thing of like, we hate these types of tropes, let's
Yeah,
move
yeah,
away
being
from them.
anti-trope,
Yeah,
right? Like subverting the trope. Like, as that's the
yeah,
thing. It's like
that's the whole thing with like with the first season, the first book, is that really the only big major death of the first book is
is the
Ned.
main character
Yeah,
kind of.
it's Ned Stark, where it's like, oh yeah, like in anything else, someone would be saved, but at that point, no, he didn't. And I think that's why I think Game of Thrones resonated with a lot of people. The Song of Ice and Fire did, because for every single fantasy thing is still kind of done the same thing. Lord of the Rings, obviously, example, they couldn't kill Gandalf, like he had to come back, or like even like something like Harry Potter comes back even though he dies. Like there's a lot of subtle things that always happen in these fantasy things, but it's like Game of Thrones was, and Song of Ice and Fire is supposed to subvert that whole thing. That's why the creation of like the Night King and being like this ruler who's evil just for the sake of being evil is really disappointing in the show's perspective, because they don't gloss on any of that at all. He's just a bad guy for the sake of being a bad guy. So that's like another negative thing. But yeah, the whole kiss uh, stabbing
Yeah, but
thing.
it's like the kiss stabbing thing, but they don't show the stabbing. It's like, this is the thing. It's like there's like they don't show the stabbing, and there's like, oh, like as in someone's gotten stabbed, and then next scene is like her laying down, and she's got this like this knife in her, and it's like, compare it to every other major character death in Game of Thrones, and all she gets is this really like
Not even like
dumb
sharp, brutal death. It's more like stab.
stab,
Like I feel
and
like
then
a lot of criticism for this episode, and maybe even for this season, is it felt very much like a soap opera. Like it's very like, I don't know, like that Shadowhunters show or something like on the CW. Like it
mhm,
feels very much that, where it's like there's a lot of will they won't they romance or betrayals, and it's like,
sure.
and it's kind of like that kind of death, but like it feels very much different from what Game of Thrones was in the previous season, especially when it comes to the death. The death should have been pretty brutal, or could have done something very very interesting with it. But this was just a stab, little blood, and just kind of died. So I think
Huh.
at that point it was kind of disappointing.
Okay.
But
I
yeah,
don't know, man. Like, it's just like they spent millions of dollars in the creation of this, and millions of dollars of getting the perfect aesthetic, and ooh, look at all these ships, and look at all these arty things. But we can't, like, spend maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe just trying to like port. like some kind of a game or something to the Wii U people. Sorry, the Wii U and the Wii's and Wii U people. All these people, right? It's weird.
Yeah,
Um,
well, yeah. I think this episode and this season has been a little bit weird, and I think people can definitely see that the quality has maybe gone down. Well, pretty much has gone down, but like just the way things are structured. Like for example, a thing that we slightly skipped over is the whole scene between Tyrion and Jon. Like I think I enjoyed that scene a lot. It was very slow.
mhm.
It took a lot of time. But the thing is, that
It felt
reminded me
very
of
Game of
old Game of
Thrones.
Thrones. It reminded me of that where
And
they just
it's
had these
weird.
talking points and like plotting things, like putting in things in people's heads, being like, should you do this? Should you do this? Or like planning the ideas that could come into fruition. This could have been done earlier in the season and then come out later on. But that's obviously because this season, I think the problem is it's rushed way too much. You don't have time for these scenes to breathe, or these ideas to breathe, or the justification for like one scene we're gonna say one thing, and the other scene we're gonna go straight to the person making the decision and making their mind up straight away. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, definitely. Like again, some of the best episodes this season is literally has to do with them kind of not doing anything, right? Like, episodes 1 and 2 felt very Game of Thrones, um, by comparison to some of the other episodes that we've seen, like, oh, the big spectacle episode. They felt less like Game of Thrones, ironically enough. Um, and such a shame because such a missed opportunity. Like having these little character moments are what keeps Game of Thrones feeling like Game of Thrones. And a lot of the quote unquote payoff for this season didn't feel, it felt empty and maybe unjustified for lack of a better word. Um and it's a shame. But yeah, I also did like the interaction, and he is kind of like what inspires John to kind of follow through with this particular attack. And even John kind of isn't sure. Like he even talks to her several times, like, how do you know things are going to be better? How do you know this? How do you know that? Um, but yeah, essentially, he kills her. And oh my god, then this part. So Drogon comes in. Drogon the dragon comes in,
Jurgen comes in.
and he just sees her dead, and just gets angry at
Yeah,
John, or it's not really clear because you think it's going to be John. It tries to make you think he's angry at John, but then it just has this tantrum, this dragon tantrum, where it just starts flinging fire everywhere. Kit Harington obviously thinking, oh no, this dragon's going to kill me because it thinks that I killed its mom, but no, it starts firing, fire breath everywhere, and coating the entire Iron Throne and melting it. Much, to be like symbolism, like, ooh, I've heard some people kind of say,
yeah.
oh yeah,
Even I've quoted it. Yeah, the
yeah, he
deconstruction of the
broke,
Iron Throne. Yeah.
yeah, it's like, oh, he broke the cycle for Danny. But it's like, it's a fucking dragon, all right? They're intelligent, but they're not that intelligent. I don't think the show establishes them to be ultra intelligent
Yeah,
or anything like
it's
that.
not Lord of the Rings smog intelligent. It's more like it knows, like it's like a loyal pet, kind of like a dire.
Yeah,
It's basically a direwolf. It
yeah,
knows who its pet is and master is, and kind of follows that. So yeah, it was a little bit of an awkward scene. Like I thought he was actually gonna
yeah,
keep the dragon and like because he is technically a Targaryen as well. Like I
a
thought that was
Targaryen.
gonna be a whole
I
thing.
mean, I'm not too surprised because I think it's very much like a thing they did to kind of keep the whole concept of dragons open-ended. So like, not everybody saw the dragon, and so dragons in the world kind of exist still as a bit of a myth. And that kind of makes sense. Kind of a thing that's lost to history. But yeah, like my thing, my hero power allows me to drop things. Oh, sorry. Uh, sorry, what was I talking about again?
Dragons.
Dragons,
Good
dragons, yeah.
old dragons. But yeah,
Um,
essentially the scene ends, comes in, it ends, um, and it just kind of skips forward. Probably at a
exactly.
certain other point, but I'm not quite sure. And yeah, and then
Yeah,
basically
yeah.
we get to the whole point with Tyrion.
Well, yeah. Well, the whole thing with Tyrion and Jon being arrested, right? Post everything.
Yes.
Um, and it's kind of interesting to see how they bring everyone together. What did you think about having them all lined up in this? In that. I guess what is it like an arena? Would you
It's
call it like an arena?
I don't know. It's an open field. I think it was basically what last season when they were trying to prove White Walkers were real to
Yeah,
Cersei.
yeah,
Hey,
Cersei.
remember how White Walkers were supposed to be the final winter and battles last 1,000 like years and it ended in one night. But anyways, just saying. Yeah, they're at this part. I thought it was a little bit. It's basically just being like we want to please the fans, so we're gonna bring everyone from like who you
Uh,
forgot to bring back. It's like what's his name? The kid who part of the Vale.
oh yeah, yeah.
There's that.
Aaron,
Yeah, Aaron. Some of the other players, Sam for some reasons there, because you know,
the unnamed prince is there.
yeah.
From
There's a lot
Dorne.
of things where they're just like probably somewhere in the books. There's a reason and
Yeah,
justification that they're there.
but the thing is, it's like it's all predicated on the notion. Okay, we brought Tyrion, and we want to punish him. It's like, oh well, who gets to decide who punishes? Oh well, you guys should pick who the king is. And like the Unsullied, like they're like they shouldn't care at all. They have all the political power here, right?
Well, it's not only
They have
that, but like they were trained to like. My whole thing is like Grey Worm he fell in
plot
love.
armor.
He fell in love. So now he's
Yeah,
like oh like that like I don't know like 30 years of his like training of being an unstoppable killing machine is like rewritten by this kind of one thing that happened. And like, because he's probably
hmm
seen atrocities. He's done some atrocities. One love of his life dying should not change his whole character and personality. Um, but yeah, I felt it's like it's very weird because like the cut. If you think about it, like
mm.
analyze about it, the more it doesn't make any sense. I'm like, how do we get to this point of John being locked up? How do we get to this point of all these people being called to a
I
council? We don't know because they do a jump
I
cut.
don't know. Yeah, it is a bit of a jump cut. I think it's pretty. I kind of see it as like John, obviously being the idiot that he is, he admitted that he killed Daenerys, rather than doing the smart thing and just like skulking off into the night.
It's like I don't know,
And
man. I
like,
just found it there.
yeah, or even just that, right? He just admits like he must have, and that's the reason why they have him arrested. And everybody's asking, "Where's John? Where's John?" It's funny how his lineage isn't mentioned by anyone
Mm.
during that whole ordeal. Um, Arya doesn't, Sansa doesn't, Bran doesn't, Tyrion doesn't. Um, Nobody brings up the fact that Jon Snow is technically the rightful, you know, heir to the throne. And
And I
it
think
kind of is
if I
funny.
remember correctly, Tyrion was basically saying you have the right to the Iron Throne more than anyone, and then that's why he
Yeah,
kills Dany. And then like whatever how long 2 weeks he's just like never mind.
yeah. It almost seems like it's one big political ploy by Tyrion to basically put Jon in a situation, which in and of itself is kind of smart, but I don't think they explain it well. Perhaps maybe when George writes it, it might be written far more like interestingly, like how he gets to trick. He basically essentially tricks um Jon into killing Daenerys under the guise of the fact that he'll be presented as a hero and everyone will love him, but like it's all a ploy to kind of get him in trouble and get him into the situation where he is, and essentially becomes a ward of the state and becomes back on the Night Watch, right back where we basically kind of saw him at the beginning of the series.
Back where he started. Um,
And I think in that sense, it is kind of there's a bit of an irony there, right? Like just like it's not the people who put themselves out there to do good things that end up being in power. It's the people who play to the shadow and step behind, who kind of stand up when the time arises.
It's
And you
basically the
kind of
Game of Thrones.
yeah, but I think it's not done as interestingly, and maybe it feels rushed. Like I think I get it. Like I get some of the stuff is done, but it's just I feel like it's too rushed. Like everybody just agrees. Oh, by the way, so everybody kind of votes Bran. Like, well, uh, Tyrion suggests that Bran should lead because he's a three-eyed raven, and he gives him a pretty cool name. I kind of like Bran the Broken. It kind of does roll off the tongue and does sound very kingly. But it's really weird because in the previous episodes, Bran is talking all about like, oh yeah, I don't have my humanity and oh, I don't want to be king. But then it's like, will you rule and will you be okay with that? And Bran's just like, this is what I've been planning my whole life for. And it's like, wait, what? That goes, what? This goes completely against what you literally said last episode.
Like, yeah,
Um,
it is like I feel like especially these past few scenes and things, there's been a very much a betrayal of characters where I'm like, this character wouldn't have acted this way, or you said one thing a while ago and you broke your character. Obviously this season, the most memorable one is probably Jaime Lannister and kind of his whole like, I'm in love with Brienne Tarth and I've changed my mind, and then he goes
yeah,
straight to Cersei and goes, "But I love you though." I'm like, and you switch it, like you literally reverted your character back to like
there's
season
this
one,
season
episode one.
this season reads like bad fan fiction.
Like they don't know who
Um,
these characters are or what their real motivations are or
and
their
then
character
and then
journeys.
and then these characters are going to make out, and these characters are going to get married, and these characters are going to fuck. Like it's just so dumb. And yeah, it's so stupid. It doesn't drive the plot forward, and it's subsequently rushed. It's so bad.
Yeah, like I don't
It
know,
just
because even
it
like
gets
the
me
whole
more
king. Yeah,
upset.
yeah.
It gets me more upset just like kind of just thinking about like when and where uh these characters are now compared to where they were and where they were going. And I think you hit the nail on the head where it does feel like a bit of a betrayal of some of the characters that they introduce. But maybe there's the whole thing about how Game of Thrones is subverts expectations, and maybe that the subversion of what people think is like, oh, a bad thing is going to happen in the end, and then they trick you and think, ah, no, good things happen. But I don't think they even have that going with this. It's really weird how everybody just kind of agrees with Bran becoming the leader of Westeros, and also that his sister is kind of okay with like kind of essentially kind of doing like a Brexit kind of deal with the
He's
North,
doing a
right?
William Wallace. He's doing the original Brexit. He,
And yeah, and just like completely separating, and it's like I could imagine everybody else being like, oh wait, we didn't know that was an option.
It's a so
you
then
know
like for the like House Greyjoy, the girl there would have been like, okay, at that point then we're gonna split as well. Like
Yeah,
that would have been one
there
of
was
those things where
anything
it's like at
like
that
that.
point then no one becomes if whoever king becomes semi forfeit because everyone has their own individual kingdoms at that point.
Mm.
So it's like it's a little
Well,
bit
yeah,
very weird and it's not really justified. Everyone's just like, okay, cool, you can do that. Ruling doesn't really like it. It's so weird. I don't know. That scene is probably the worst scene out of this whole
it's just really
season because
rushed. It's
it's just
really rushed.
yeah, it
I,
makes
I
no
don't,
actual sense.
and the thing is, I don't even have that big of a problem of the concept of Bran becoming the new king, right? Um, but there's just nothing that builds up to it, and he's just so smug, and it's like, oh well, maybe it's like the classic line he always says to people. It's like, when they're like, oh, I'm sorry I couldn't be there for you, and it's like, you were where you needed to be. It's like, all right, mate.
Which basically means that his whole play was he knew that Daenerys was gonna kill a bunch of people, but to get to this point, it's kind of like a what is it, a Doctor Strange almost, where he's like, this shit all this bad stuff has to happen, so we get to this point, so then we can I don't know like rule peacefully, because yeah I don't know like because Bran he you can see in the like past, future, and present. He's basically like a time travel wizard almost. Like he has
I
the
don't
most
think he can
wisdom.
see. I don't think he can see the future. I think he can only see the past and present.
Because at that point,
Um,
like, he would know what would be going on, or he's like the most wisest, I
yeah.
suppose. So I suppose it kind of makes him to be on the throne, but at that point,
Well,
I
I
don't know.
mean, think about it. Bran probably knew about um uh you know Daenerys blowing up King's Landing. And he said nothing about it in some
Or
capacity,
there's no
right?
like,
Because that,
as far as I know, there's no like subtle hints, like callbacks, where he's like laying some hints down, where it's like,
no,
there'll be blood, pavement with blood, or something
but
like
if
in
he's
fire,
aware of
and
all if he's aware of all things, he would have probably been aware of the fact that, oh, like, this character does exist, and you know yeah, like he would do that. She may do that, or she's planning to do that at this particular time, but he's just zips his mouth because apparently he's like gunning for that number one position. You know?
basically he's just
It's
like, if I keep my mouth shut, I know I'll get the top job, so I'm gonna let people die.
yeah, it's weird. Again, I don't have anything against Bran being king. It just seems like it's very fast, and it doesn't seem to make sense
Yeah,
with
there's
the
a lot of
overall plot
dialogue
of
of
Game
these
of
said
Thrones.
characters being like, "Oh, we're gonna do this," or like, and then they're like, "Okay, then," or like, there's no
Oh,
like combating,
and Tyrion getting out of being in prison, being like, "Oh, you're going to be the hand of the king, and you're going to do it for the rest of your life. That's your punishment." It's like,
And
all
it's
right,
like, and then Grey Worm's like, "Okay, then," like, it's very
yeah.
weird. Like at the start,
Even though
at
earlier
the start he's very aggressive. He's like, "Someone needs to be
you don't
punished."
speak here.
Yeah, you
Yeah, he's
don't
like, you
speak
don't
here.
speak.
And then at some point he's like, "Okay, I'm gonna make everyone vote to be king." And now I'm literally forfeit. And now like John won't die either, and he's just gonna be going to the Night's Watch.
I do like how Davos suggests that the Unsullied, um, like get their own places and start their own houses. And they literally can't because they're all eunuchs.
So you'll die at in the like
Yeah,
literally in the
in
generation.
one generation, exactly. I do like the irony in him asking that and not really like kind of understanding like why it wouldn't work or like how
I did
explain
I
it.
somehow like the line where it's like, I don't even know why I have a say in this, but I say yes. I'm like,
Oh yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah.
exactly. It's very meta. Yeah, I'll just like, why is Davos having a vote? Why is Brienne having a vote?
See, it's one of
None
those
of
things
these
where
people are relevant.
if you have a jump cut, you don't
Bad
question
fan
it.
fiction.
If you jump cut stuff, you
Bad
don't
fan
question
fiction.
stuff. That's the problem. That's a good screenwriter trick. If you jump cut, no one questions it, and they just go forward. Like I'm gonna semi spoil this one movie. It's Your Name. Have you watched Your
Mm.
Name yet?
No, I haven't.
Okay, I'm not gonna spoil it now because
Okay.
the
Oh, okay.
magic there's a good magic part of that thing. But
Oh,
essentially,
where they time skip or something.
there's something got to do with time, but you don't notice it because there's a montage and it goes really quickly. You never question it. But then until they relate it into the plot, you're like, that was smart because
Ah,
I would never have known that because it went by so quickly that your brain does not justify it. But yeah, and I
ah.
think that's what they kind of did with that whole scene.
Yeah,
Um,
but it's like, but I think people aren't stupid. I don't think the people who watch Game of Thrones are all just like clapping their hands like, seals in like, oh yeah, I love this. Oh, it's all bad, and at least they didn't go with Sam's suggestion of his proto-democracy. I think I'd be pretty like pissed if they did end up just becoming a democratic country after the events of it. But although the alternative isn't that much better, they kind of have a scene, at the ships where they're kind of sending off John, and he kind of eyes off Grey Worm, but he talks to his sisters, and like they all kind of apologize to him and say, "Oh, we're sorry, we couldn't get you to stay. Will you ever forgive us?" And the thing is, he doesn't say yes. Um, he kind of like ignores it,
mhm.
which is kind of implying that he doesn't forgive them for putting him in a situation where he now has to go back to the Night Watch. It was either his life, well, it's one of those things. It's like, it's either his life or going back to up north to the Night Watch, right? But like the thing is, uh, this whole thing about this season was about, reuniting with family, and all the time, like, John felt like Sansa didn't really treat him like family because
Mm.
he was obviously adopted. And this kind of shows like when push comes to shove, like all the people that he put his neck out for um didn't even end up trying, or they
Or at least
couldn't.
fighting for as much, like, and I feel like that's kind of semi being the message, I think, of Game of Thrones, and
Yeah, yeah,
but like
exactly.
they don't really show it. It's like the whole thing with Ned Stark. He's kind of like the outlier of the whole season, where he's noble, he doesn't tell lies, he always tries to do the right thing, much like Jon, and he gets killed for it. No one
Killed for it,
and
exactly.
that's the whole point of the whole thing. Or it's like, in this
Well, I
world,
mean,
being the noble one does not get you anywhere. He killed Daenerys, and he's back to kind of square one, where no one will remember
mhm,
his lineage. It's almost like the same thing of one of the maesters, the blind guy at the Night's
mhm,
Watch, where he's technically, he's royalty
a
almost.
Targaryen.
Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
like it's kind of like the same thing. It's kind of like the same cycle, where it's like he's back to square one almost. But that's the thing. It's like it's kind of defeating. But at the same time, he did say he never wanted to be king. And
Yeah,
I
but I
think
don't think
yeah,
he.
that's the thing. Throughout the whole series, it built him up to be a king. But the thing is, he's too loyal to be one almost. In this, like, he's too good for it. So I feel like he'd probably be better off anyways. What he was doing, going beyond the wall and just
Mhm.
exploring. Like, I
Yeah,
think that's probably
yeah.
better for
I
his
think
character in the end.
yeah, I kind of find it funny because I think that's exactly what they want to do. Like, kind of show once again, like, the people who put themselves out there to kind of try and change the world, they're the ones who ultimately kind of get fucked up by the system. And in the end, that, he's kind of justified in thinking that, yeah, look, his family doesn't actually care about him as much as he maybe wanted them or thought they might. Like,
Because he's still
uh,
a bastard.
because he's still a bastard. He's still not really her real brother, Sansa's real brother. That was like a point of contention between those two when they were younger. And yeah, it's just like kind of an unfortunate interaction that they have. Um, and yeah, like I think in the end, like Sansa says it, but it means like she gets to keep the independence and of the North, which is ultimately what she wanted. Now, um, there is one other particular scene I want to kind of talk about before we get to like just kind of the final scenes, kind of like giving everybody a final goodbye. You have the scene where Peter Dinklage gathers everybody, all the he's the new hand king, and he brings everyone along. Samuel Tarly, he's kind of like the maester, I believe, of the crew.
I guess you don't have to shave
Kind
your
of
head anymore, or yeah.
or whatever. Yeah, I originally thought he was a scholar, but I guess he's a maester. And yeah, like he's kind of getting everybody together. He has like Bronze there. You have Sedavos. You have even Brienne, who I think is probably like the head of the knights, whatever. Like I guess King's
The
Landing
King Knight
knights,
person, yeah.
King knights.
Basically, Jamie
Um,
Lannister's old job, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like it kind of goes into them kind of squabbling and talking about, oh, what's the plans for the future? Oh, like, in Westeros, oh, how are we going to plan all this? How are we going to do that? How's this? It does seem kind of organic that like these kind of entities exist, or they're ghosts or whatever it may be. Um, and yeah, it's it, I don't know. It's interesting to see because again, I kind of like that they talk about the trivial things in Westeros, like oh, like Bronn is talking about oh, like yeah, I want to fund brothels, right?
All the brothels
Um,
back.
all the brothels, and Brienne's like I think ships kind of take the priority there. It's like this banter that's kind of funny, but you could believe like these characters together, finally working together. Um, it might come off like that, but at the same time, it's like it kind of doesn't break the wheel, right?
Yeah, we're basically
That
reverting
that
back to season one, episode like 3 or 4, when we had the scenes of like Littlefinger, Varys, and all that, like, and all
yeah,
and the
it's
Maester
just
being
different
like,
people,
it's just different people and their whole type of thing. So it's kind of like everything kind of continues almost, because like
almost. But I think the
because I think
implication
I think
is
the problem is, like, you'd think, okay, like Bran, three-eyed raven dude, you know, he would do something, or like he would have some control. Like we don't see any of that. We don't see if he's a good leader or he's planning it. It almost feels like the people at that table is basically figuring everything out.
Which is fine. Like, I guess he doesn't really care. Like, he kind of cares about, like, ooh, important things. Like, where's that dragon? I'm gonna look, right? That's the kind of thing he kind of concerns himself with, rather than the trivial concerns of mortals, right? Um, but yeah, I do like those little character moments. But again, like, I kind of wish that, yeah, they had more time to kind of build on that and, like, kind of show that, yeah, maybe he isn't the best character, but, like, every character isn't the best character just because of the circumstances you're in, or something like that. It's just unfortunate that they kind of leave it as, oh, like, and then everybody and then Bran lives happily ever after, and all of Westeros is saved, and Sansa is like this, like, and it's kind of interesting because they have you follow the Starks and what they're doing, like the last three Starks. You have Sansa in the throne room, and she's wearing this, like, kind of really tight corset kind of outfit. Looks really good on her, we'll admit. But the thing is, yeah, it's like you're like viewing him, like you have Kit Harington, kind of walking down, and he sees all the wildlings,
He's
at
back
the
with
wall.
Ghost, you know.
Yeah, he's back with, and he pets him. Wow, right? They finally had the budget to actually get, because I remember people were pissed off that, like, oh, he sent him away and didn't even pet him, and then they got him to pet him this episode, which I just kind of found funny. It's
That'd
like,
be
oh,
funny if
the
they reshot that
budget.
really quickly, like, oh crap, crap, crap.
It's not even his real hand, right? It's
Yeah.
just like a budget, just like a quick budget petting of the dog. And then you also have Arya, who's decided to just be like a explorer of some kind. And they're just kind of following them from different, like, they're all walking in the same direction, like, oh, they're walking left, and it's kind of going back and forth, and they're all kind of doing the same thing. And it kind of ultimately ends there. That, I kind of like,
The
it's
Starks
bittersweet,
won,
like, but
basically.
yeah, in a sense. And maybe like, my version of Game of Thrones is like more, maybe like like the world goes to shit, right? Like, everybody forgets about the Night Walkers. They forget about all of these things that happen because they kill the main characters off, and someone usurps his throne. And but by the and very much like, kind of like, Egyptian history, it's very common for like pharaohs and rival pharaohs to completely, like, destroy and dismantle ruins dedicated to different emperors, uh, and have their memory be lost to time. And there's a lot of power in kind of erasing important people or important figures, or other things. When you kind of get rid of them, you kind of, much like 1984, you kind of memory hold them so people forget that they exist. And I can imagine a very similar thing happening if somebody decides to do like a coup within the government. They kind of kill all the close people, and then that kind of leads to them erasing all of, like, Samuel Tarly's, like, hard work keeping records during the, quote unquote, Song of Ice and Fire. They had to slip that particular line in,
They very
right?
much did a Lord of the Rings almost. Like
Yeah,
the whole
yeah,
like I'm gonna
yeah,
write the
they did.
book, I'm gonna yeah. It's very very
Um,
similar.
yeah, but it would have been cool if they kind of did something more along that line. Like, do you get what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Like especially with that type of ending. Like I think my whole thing is the most open ended is probably something like Arya's almost like her journey of like I'm gonna be an
She could
explorer.
kind of go somewhere.
Yeah, where all the maps haven't been explored yet. I'm like, yeah, that probably like you can probably think of things in your own head. And like, yeah, maybe she'll find the dragon Drogon or something like that, or certain things like for example, uh, that her whole assassin power, she never really uses it again with the faces and getting all that training. She really doesn't do much with it. So I think like as a character, there's somewhere in the books she must use it at some point. It must be a point of contention, even almost, or like
Who
I know.
knows? I doubt it.
There's even things because you can bring back people from the dead in this universe, like depending on how early or late it is. Maybe Drogon randomly flew it to like well, Melisandre is dead, but
Dakota.
possibly someone who's like that, and they can resurrect them. But like, there's no hint of that. I feel like that's like it's like very early speculation at this point, where like someone
Well,
be like,
they
hey,
did
that
say,
you never know, you know, could happen in this
they
universe.
they did say Peter Dinklage did say that oh, wait 10 years and we'll see if I'm a good maester. Sorry, a good hand of the king, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it could just be like, hint at, oh, maybe they might do it. Maybe that's when the new setting is based off. If it's not in the past, it might be 10 years or a few years into the future, and it'll be, oh, Bran the Broken got assassinated. That's what I want. That's another version of events how I wanted to end, like something like a mid-battle, a mid-assassination of people. So you don't know whether or not the throne is kind of taken by Bran or has someone co-opted it or whatever. It seems like, again, it's open ended, but it kind of keeps it interesting that it doesn't really matter which one it is. It really comes down to what you think the Game of Thrones represents. And I don't think a lot of people agree with D&D's, I guess, vision of Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I feel like I think the main like the way the plot points that where these characters go, I do like. I do like John like going out into the wild. I do like Bran is a little bit of a weird one, but that's kind of fine, and I'm fine with all these characters. I think the problem is with this season and the previous few seasons that there hasn't been shown any build up or justification for these characters to act this particular way and get to this particular place where like
In an organic
yeah,
way.
it's in a very much an organic way. Like Arya, like she seems like a person, but like she had a whole assassination thing. Then all of a sudden she appears and she's like, yeah, Daenerys is evil, and now she's like, I'm gonna be an adventurer now. Like her character is like,
All over
she's
the
like really
place.
powerful, but there's no reason for her to be like, I'm just gonna explore now, or like do something, be like the Hound possibly, but like yeah, there's a lot of like context that's been missing, and I knew this was going to kind of happen when they did run out of book material, and then you can clearly see it a little bit in season 6, and then you can very much see it in season 7. Where I'm like, okay, they're just giving us the clear dot points of where we need to go to where the story is going to go, and that's what they kind of did with this show. So I feel like at this point in time, I feel very much so. If the books ever get completed, the books will be the definitive version of this story. And I'm pretty sure that will be
Yes,
it.
I agree. I definitely agree. Um, but yeah,
But yeah, like
it,
it's one of those things where I didn't feel as emotional watching the season finale almost. Like I felt like
yeah,
I didn't have that thing where I'm like, oh, I'm so sad that this is
yeah,
gone.
but that's because of the last couple of seasons. That's especially this season. Like as much as we hate the Dawn season, this season was pretty bad. And ultimately,
this
and
is where it hit
ultimately,
the audience mass where everyone's like, wait a second, no, we don't like this is not what we wanted. Or like
mm,
what this is not even high quality stuff. Like as I
yeah, high
mentioned
quality.
before, it's very much like a soap opera, very much where it's like as I mentioned before, John gets dumbed down to just say 3 things, and like the previous seasons, he was a pretty smart character. He was basically him and Tyrion being like pretty smart on what they say and what they do, but then
Mm,
John turned into an idiot who was just like, I love my queen, you know. So yeah, I felt very disappointed with that. But yeah,
mm,
overall, I feel like this episode, I'd say I think the first 20 minutes is maybe an alright thing, especially when Daenerys is doing her like kind of
yeah,
authoritarian speech, and it kind of looks really good. But then
yeah.
yeah,
Her speech is really good. I do admit. Dothraki is a pretty scary sounding language. When
yeah,
when you
there's
kind of
certain
have to
languages that are very angry when they sound very angry.
yeah,
But yeah, essentially like I don't know overall like as a whole package of Game of Thrones, like the series, I I I would say it's good at the start and it gets pretty bad at the end, like most TV
mhm.
shows do. Um, this season's pretty
He-
bad.
he-
There's not really much highlights for this even season, almost aside from
no.
just character moments, really.
Yeah, I mean maybe the best kind of episode if you want like the highlight moment is maybe like episode 3 because I think that probably has the best cinematography story like balance. Like obviously I don't like the ending of episode 3, but everything else about it is pretty top notch. So I think once you ordered your night vision goggles. That's probably one of the better kind of I guess episodes to watch. I kind of feel like, and I've said it before on this episode, I'm happy to give Game of Thrones a 0 out of 10, a 0 out of 10, just because of how much they've dropped the ball. Because everything that you can give this episode, from all the stuff that I talk about, like that I'm okay with, Bran getting the throne, and even Jon Snow walking away at the end aesthetically into the trees with the wildlings, the people he actually belonged with. All that stuff is fine if it was done organically and with time and meticulous kind of thought that the previous seasons were able to inject into it. Again, that doesn't mean like a show can't have good seasons. Even shows that are considered bad have really good seasons. For example, one that comes to mind that a lot of people kind of mention is Dexter. In my opinion, I think Dexter seasons 1 and 2 are the good ones.
I say season 1 to 3, but yeah.
1, 2, 3. I don't know. I wasn't a big fan of the crazy ex-girlfriend, who's also a serial killer plot line. Like, it kind of was like it kind of leads in from 2, but I kind of didn't dig it. And you can kind of tell because again, like, they didn't everything post season 2 wasn't from the books. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, because apparently in the books the Dark Passenger is actually like a mystical entity. Whereas they kind of make the Dark Passenger out to be this kind of psychotic side of Dexter, and that's probably a more interesting way to do the story than like magic mumbo jumbo. But like, yeah, but so yeah, we can kind of concede 3, because I did watch 3 as well, but like, the rest I didn't watch because I just heard such awful things about them.
I think it's like season 6 is like, like,
and he becomes a
really
lumberjack or something, right?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, that disappointed a lot of people. And at the same time, I think it came out, it finished around about the same time as Breaking Bad, right? And, it came on the heels of it. Meanwhile, people were saying, oh, it is so great. And then people were like, oh, Dexter was horrible, right?
Yeah, I feel like Dexter was like, it's part of that old guard of TV shows where it's like, it went on for quite a long time, and then like stuff like Breaking Bad, Mad Men, even stuff like True Blood kind of came out, and that was like the new usher of the new generation of TV shows that brought us to this point, where we've got stuff like Game of Thrones and things like that. I feel like it's pretty much almost kind of the same as something like Lost. It was like Lost and Dexter, pretty much came out around the same time.
Yeah,
they were very much known, and then they ended.
Heroes, right? That's another one that kind of comes to mind for me. Yeah, I definitely agree. Another one I think a lot of people would compare this to is Lost. Now, I know Lost has its fans, but I'm very much glad that I dropped Lost after. I don't know. I think I watched when season 2 happened, and like they found a hatch.
The hatch.
And the hatch
with
has
the numbers.
food, and the hatch has food in it. I'm like, oh man, they're gonna be stuck on this island for a long ass.
You knew then and there that this show was not going to end anytime soon.
It's
like a shonen anime. You're like, oh no, this is going to go on forever, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Hurley was fat forever. How does that make sense? There's something fucked up about this island, and that dude manages to maintain his weight for so long. But yeah, like the whole show had a lot of potential. It was like a mystery, but then it just turned into time travel, space travel, and then like, oh, the whole everything that you see is actually one big test to see if you're a good person or not. Yeah, okay, thanks. That definitely isn't a waste of what, like 10. How long did Lost go for? Not 10 years. Maybe it went on.
I know it was like 6 seasons. I think 7 seasons. It was around there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and at that point, no one cared, because I feel like Lost was a thing, because like people were like the most expensive pilot ever made at that point. It had so many viewers, and remember like in that like late 2000s craze where everyone tried to be like Lost, where there was like an event and everyone had to be like, what's the next event? Like I think it was like Flashpoint or something like that, or Flash Forward, where all of a sudden everyone skipped 2 years ahead, or like the one where there's like half the people were missing, like the leftovers. There was all
Oh,
these
okay.
shows where like certain things, or like the one where everyone like electricity just went out for some reason. We all got to live without electricity. Like
Yeah, like they had this
everyone
one
started start
gimmick.
doing those shows because Lost was
Yeah, like
actually
they
quite
had.
influential with that.
Yeah, I mean, Lost was very influential in a lot of ways. Like I remember what changes that came alongside like Lost as a TV serial is like how they would present a show. Because I'm very much a like remember being younger and watching the opening to something like some of my favorite cartoons. Like, they'll have like a guitar riff and they'll have a whole song and dance about the whole thing. But Lost kind of kept it simplistic, like Fresh Prince, classic TV show, had like the classic Fresh Prince of Bel-Air theme song opening. And eventually, has the whole song and dance and then the episode starts. Whereas Lost, it was just very
It
simplistic.
was
It's
that
just the
yeah,
word lost. It's just the word lost
and
and
then
just
just
kind of that's it.
and then that was it.
And I kind of found that like TV shows emulate and still emulate this kind of structure because it is like it's kind of like you know you know what you kind of want and you kind of cut straight to the action. It's not like a Japanese anime opening where you're hearing the song and it's like you're getting spoiled for stuff that are happening later. It's like the characters now. Let's get in and watch it. And it has ripples through even modern television like Stranger Things. Its opening is exactly the same.
Mm.
It's just a lot of zoom ins and like cool synth music playing, and it's just Stranger Things. Whereas like if the show was actually made in the 80s, it would have like all these like weird like crossfades and names popping up and the character doing certain activities so what kind of person they are and like for example what's the
Like
what's the
Cheers and
main
stuff. Like
yeah. That's what I would imagine it would be because that's how those things were done in the past, right? Like the main character, is it 11, right?
yeah,
11, her character would be shown like using her psychic powers, and it's something that
eating
even
those
in the series.
waffles.
Yeah. There's all like that's what you would see like in these kind of openings, but instead they know that okay, the demographic who are watching these shows they're gonna want like there's a reason why Netflix has a skip intro button, because people don't give a shit about the intro, and that's kind of what Lost kind of pioneered, and there's a lot of things that Lost pioneers, but one of the things that pioneered was a shitty finale, and that has kind of continued over to Game of Thrones in terms of rushed writing, um, uh, uh,
Mystery
bad
box writing.
pacing, mystery box, right? Yeah, it's like it's like the classic, like they got a target and they're just throwing darts at
They're just like, how
and
do we get
seeing,
to this point?
Okay,
This
let's
reason, that
see.
reason.
Okay, let's see. What is it? Daenerys goes to King's Landing with her dragon, and like it's
And
like
it dies. Same with her friend, therefore meaning justifying her whole attack, setting in
yeah.
motion the reason why John kills. Like it's like
And also Captain Jack Sparrow kills Jamie, kind of stabs him several times in the kidney, some shit
because
like that.
we don't want them to survive because they would probably want the heir to the throne as well. But
Okay.
tie up loose ends.
I'm still not over it. I'm still not over the fact that they spent millions and millions of dollars on this show and they couldn't even give Daenerys like a good death scene or an interesting death scene between um uh uh you know uh John and Daenerys. It's just a knife is just in her left in her and that's it. It's not like Red Wedding style where she's stabbed several times. Nothing about it is iconic. It's just rushed
Well,
and it's
we didn't even see
awful.
the blade go in. I feel like that's almost the thing as
Yeah,
well. They wanted
yeah,
to do the
that's
whole
what I
shock,
mean.
like who stabbed who. I'm like, every
Yeah, that
single
that
scene that someone's died, you've seen the blade go in, or you've seen someone get stabbed, or something like that. You've seen the blood, you've seen the action and the motion. They just didn't
I don't
show
get
that
it.
whole plunging blade action. They should have done
It
something
just
like that.
it doesn't make any sense. Does not make
But
insane.
anyways, I feel like we're going to be talking about this for a very long time because we basically can. But yeah, overall, I don't know. Definitely will
Uh,
keep on reading the books if they ever come out, and I'll probably
yeah,
report. I'll probably report back being like, okay, this is what they missed. This was what it could have been. So
yeah, I guess retroactively, I always said this about Game of Thrones, that the one good thing about having the TV show and having the book is that, it's kind of like its own timeline, right? It doesn't you can read the book, sorry, you can watch the TV show and not necessarily be ruined about everything in the book because they don't copy it one for one. So there's still going to be surprises here and there as you're reading it. Even me, like I'm pretty. If George manages to actually like finish off the books, I'll consider like reading them if that makes sense. I kind of don't want to, start a series and then like the dude never actually finishes the book series and he has to get like a. You know how like they sometimes get like posthumous authors to finish off books.
mm-hmm.
I don't want to kind of read something like, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see where it goes in the future. And again, I kind of see it like an alternate timeline that you're reading, or an alternate book, story that doesn't follow everything in the same way. Hopefully it doesn't,
Yeah, hopefully
and
not. Like,
hopefully not. Yeah.
time will tell basically with the Game of Thrones. I feel like yeah, and like if people care and people care about the planned prequels or whatever the hell they're doing with it, like they're gonna milk this thing
No, I
if
don't
they
think
care.
so, man. I don't think so, dude. I think the fan backlash towards this is going to be huge. And I think that's going to affect a lot of what HBO will be doing with Game of Thrones going forward. Maybe they've done filming, maybe they've done a lot for the prequels or the sequel or whatever, but I think like it's gonna have left a bad taste in people's mouths. And people already kind of, from what I understand, are struggling to even care about having HBO as a streaming service as
Yeah,
is.
if you didn't notice, like they add two things. They add obviously they got the Watchmen trailer that came out like 2 weeks ago. They've got
Yeah.
his Dark Materials, which is like another fantasy book thing that they're trying to do as well. And they released the Westworld season 3 thing. So they're very much being like,
Oh,
please,
I saw that
yeah, they're
trailer.
basically
What the
like please,
hell?
they're like please, basically being like please, like
Don't I
we've got
don't
more stuff, like
I promise, yeah.
yeah.
Nah, man, like I couldn't give I personally don't give two shits. And yeah, look. The thing is, look, I'm being kind of hyperbolic with Game of Thrones, when I say that I'm giving it a 0 out of 10. But the thing is, I'm kind of not as well. And I think the fact that a lot of it, a lot, some people like it's kind of like video games. Like some people like a journey of a video game, like all the gameplay and all the like the graphics and stuff. Like I'm very much like somebody who is maybe spoiled in a modern generation where you know having just gameplay and just graphics is kind of not good enough for certain games. If there's a story element, the story has to be coherent. The story has to make sense. The story should make you invested in what happens to you as a character and the character in the world that you're immersed in. And I think in very much the same way, yeah, sure, maybe at the beginning of a game, you're really enjoying it, but then towards the end, like, the boss is really dumb and the boss fight is really easy or boring, and honestly doesn't push it to the boundary where it needs to be. And I think it's the same thing with Game of Thrones. We have a pretty high standard for Game of Thrones, and when it doesn't meet those standards, it's kind of disappointing. I think I've said that for so many times about Star Wars, that when Star Wars gets an average, that's not good enough. And that sounds bad, but it's just because like Star Wars is associated with like high quality sci-fi, sci-fantasy. I guess I don't know. It's really weird what it falls on. Sci-fantasy content, and when it doesn't reach that, people get disappointed.
Because
Um,
it used to be the best at that.
because it used to be the best at what it did, exactly. And same thing with Game of Thrones. It used to be it in a lot of people's eyes was seen as a kind of um not, I wouldn't say new generation, but like, kind of like a continuation of the genre put forth after Lord of the Rings, right? Like Lord of the Rings, people got into casual people got into Lord of the Rings because of the characters and how it was filmed and all that kind of stuff. And this kind of gave those same people its next round of fancy drama and intrigue. But then it just drops everything towards the end. So yeah, ultimately, the amount of plot armor, especially towards the end of the series, the lack of interesting things other than kind of superficial stuff like Westeros burning and dark shadows to hide certain things that they kind of do. D&D seem to sacrifice and prioritize style over function, and that ultimately is what Game of Thrones suffers from. That's kind of like my posthumous review of Game of Thrones. I guess we'll see where things go in the future, but I don't think they're gonna have a lot of. It's gonna be interesting to see if they do manage to pull off this prequel thing that's going on at HBO, and it's gonna be extra interesting to see how D&D interact with Marvel for their Star Wars film, which they've obviously kind of which they ditched Game of Thrones for in order to kind of do it. Like if they're doing like the Knights of the Old Republic stuff, or if they're doing something 100 years. I hope if they do something in the future, it's set like 1,000 years, so it's not like
It doesn't touch
anywhere.
anything that we
Yeah,
like.
that that's related, and but when I say it doesn't touch, like it's also like not restricted by things um that happen in the past. It can just kind of be its own entity, have its own cool story, and that's kind of okay. We'll see whether they're able to kind of pull something like that off. Um, and yeah, like I guess I want Star Wars to be good, but I'm not very um I don't have a lot of confidence after seeing how D&D handle beloved properties
It's funny.
such
The
as
both
Game of
people who
Thrones.
subverted expectations have got hands of Star Wars now. Ryan Johnson and D&D. So I'm like, oh
Yeah,
man, like I like Star Wars in a very bad place. Like,
yeah, and it's just screwing over franchise after franchise, right?
yeah,
Um,
it's basically the things that you love. If they're ever gonna do a remake of it, it's probably gonna be bad, or like touch upon it, it's gonna be bad these days. Like
they'll
at some
they'll have
point,
to do something like an
at
animation.
some point someone has to learn, and like I don't know what it's gonna take, like 5 years down the track, where like things get back into good entertainment that they used to be, and not trying to like the modern equivalent of whatever we're doing now. But yeah, I like Game of Thrones. It's very interesting. It did some interesting stuff. I'd say still go like I'd say probably read the books more than the TV show at this point. Um, but yeah, that's basically our Game of Thrones talk. We'll probably maybe talk about it in the future at some point, like if there's any hate or like there's probably going to be some backlash,
Oh
news,
yeah, there's got to be a
controversy.
lot of news for
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Yeah, you know what? I'll definitely bring it up because I want to see what the kind of Reddit community kind of talks about, and in terms of their review for the last episode, I don't think it'll be as harsh, but it I think it definitely will have some interesting comments in terms of what people think about it.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that was Game of Thrones. Moving on to Amazon and what they've been doing with their streaming service is they cancelled a superhero show that I think no one really watched but me and like some really hardcore people that like the comic books, and that is The
Mhm.
Tick. They canceled after 2 seasons. What they did with season two is probably one of the main reasons why, where they did the good old trick of splitting one season in half and then releasing the other half later on in the year because that brings more views, I think, but basically doesn't really because you forget it's there and then people don't watch it. So the Tick got
Uh,
canceled after 2 seasons. And this is one of those like the Tick is it's very much like a Deadpool, very meta, where it's based off this superhero kind of world where the Tick he's got amnesia, he doesn't know who he is, he's an idiot, but he's basically invincible. So he basically just goes with all these situations, he always wins. He's with his sidekick Arthur, who's more of the brains. And it's kind of like this comedy take on superheroes, and I always found it very interesting and how they do a lot of this stuff. But unfortunately, it didn't find an audience. It got cancelled. Funnily enough, that there actually was a live action show of this beforehand, back in like 2003, 2004, with the guy who voices the guy, what is it? Yeah, American Dad and Family Guy, the guy with the crippled chair. Like, it's like he's got that manly voice. He was the Tick at one point. So that got cancelled, and they had a cartoon. I feel like Tick is never meant to survive anywhere past comic books, which is unfortunate, because I thought in this time and age where there's a lot of superhero stuff, people would appreciate, I guess, very meta superhero jokes.
I think the thing with the Tick is that, because even I'm aware of the Tick in the in comic form. The thing that I kind of find funny is, have you ever watched Very Odd Parents?
Yep.
Yeah,
Great
he
show.
kind of reminds me of the great, excellent show. Although kind of weird what happened to it. Anyways, the Tick kind of reminds me of the Crimson Chin,
Yeah.
who's like this kind of like this superhero who has like this huge chin, and very much like the Tick in the comic kind of has this kind of aesthetic and look as well. I think the thing with the Tick is like it's definitely like an indie comic. Because even like I don't think I've ever read anything by is it New England Comics? I
think so. Yeah.
But I haven't, like, me, to be honest, me kind of reading anything other than like DC is already hard enough as it is. I do like the odd kind of indie comic here and there. But what did you think of the second season? And did it open up for a third season?
Yeah, very much did, and I think that's also where the semi disappointment is. Where like there's a lot of, you could easily wrap, if they knew this was gonna happen, get like half a season and wrap kind of everything up, because like the first season is just kind of like one mystery, and then the second season it's kind of, they're opening up a little bit more. They're in like the I think the Hall of Heroes, where they start I think they're called the Family 5, Family 6, where it's like, you know, their version of like the Avengers or Justice League, and they have their own little facilities where they're just like, yeah, we have unlimited breadsticks here, and it's like, you know, fun jokes like that, where it's like they have their own little superhero team. And it's just one of those things where it's like the characters are really cool, but I feel like, I just couldn't find its audience, and it's very much was a fan fulfillment thing. The Tick was, so I enjoyed it, the you know, how it was, and it's gonna be one of the things where it's gonna be probably lost in time, but if you do like your superhero stuff, you like your comic book stuff, and you learn something that's a little bit more, it's like Deadpool but not as crude. I'd say very much like the Tick is probably the route to go, because it is, I'd say it's very good material. You know, they do funny stuff where they make fun of like you know, theme songs to costumes to like the whole shebang. So I really enjoyed the Tick. But yeah, I can understand and justify that it did get cancelled, which is kind of unfortunate. But you know, people got to make money, because you know, Amazon, they're gonna make that Lord of the Rings TV show that's gonna like cost so much money. So
Yeah, there's also that Tolkien movie.
oh yeah, there's that movie, yeah, where it's like
Yeah,
a biographical movie about J.R. Tolkien. I'm like,
I
okay.
I think so. But again, like, I don't know. I don't know if it interests me enough. I don't really like necessarily, um, you know, biographies, movies or books or anything. Like, unless there's something specifically that's very interesting about said person. I don't usually go out of my way to read or watch anything like that. But I do remember that being a point of contention. But I don't know if it's doing any well. Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah, it's like one of those dramas that, you know, might survive the busy season of all the action movies. But yeah, aside from that, yeah, we're gonna move on to another comic book thing, which is let's just say a family favorite, not so family favorite. You know, Gotham. Um, and it had its season finale like about a month ago, and I think
A month ago,
we basically haven't had time to talk about it because Game of Thrones happened, and then like Game of Thrones
life
talked. Yeah,
Endgame happened. There's a lot of kind of big things happening.
yeah, in
Definitely,
the field.
and but Gotham is kind of like a low priority, I think, honestly speaking.
Well, that I feel like that's
Um,
what it was. Like even in general, that's where people placed it in the, I guess, nerd sphere of TV shows, where it's like it's very
mhm.
low tier, like where people are like, oh, I don't care about it as much. It's
It's
not connected to something like Arrow Flashes,
it's
or
it's weird because a lot of people often say that Gotham is the better DC TV show. Now, it might be just because like I'm a little bit biased with my Arrow kind of TV show, Arrowverse kind of TV shows. Like I think for me, like I can kind of forgive a lot of the kind of low budget costume designs because like you can only do so much like with tight body skin suits without making the actor and the aesthetic look really like unappealing and uncomfortable, right?
mm-hmm.
But I know that is sometimes a really big problem for people like not having that budget kind of ruins a lot of the immersion within the world of superheroes, which is, obviously, it's supposed to be something that you want your audience to kind of believe in. With something like Gotham, this is kind of like a retrospective slash kind of mini series review. Um, I think, I guess one of the best places to go is just, what you felt about, Gotham at the beginning
Mm.
of the series, because I think one of the big things about Gotham is that it definitely flipped in between going from season 1 to season 2.
Yeah, it very much had that kind of flip. I would say personally that maybe season one's probably the worst season. Maybe I'm not, I'd have to remember what season one was very
Season
much what, because I
season
know it was about Falcone and the other mobster boss, and there was the love
the
triangle.
thing
Yeah,
the,
so
th- the thing with season 1 is it was grounded on because since it didn't have any Batman villains outside of like it had uh, the Penguin, but the Penguin was more like at the time was more of like a side character who kind of rose up in the ranks throughout the TV show. And he worked for a mob boss known as Fish Mooney, who is played by I think Jada Pinkett Smith, Will Smith's wife. And yeah, ultimately, like the whole season was, Penguin's trying to get in on, the kind of mafia boss gangs, and you had Jim Gordon, an up and coming, detective who's trying to do the right thing and be good, but he kind of comes to learn that, Gotham has its skeleton. And I personally liked season 1 because it kind of kept things quite grounded in it. It's just like a mafia show or a season about the mafia in Gotham, which I think like sometimes they don't kind of focus on that so much in the comics, like in the sense that like they don't do like a whole arc where he's going after this particular mafia boss. There is obviously like the kind of classic crime families in Gotham, but they don't really have a lot of mainstream appeal compared to someone like the Joker or the Riddler or Scarecrow or something, right? These things kind of pop up and you immediately know who that is. Like if you say like Falcone, you're thinking, oh well, some mafia guy. But within Batman lore, I kind of liked how it is. But in season 2, and even the name of this, the first half of season 2 is called The Rise of Villain, with the second part being called The Wrath of Villain.
mm.
And this season is when they started to get into a little bit more of like kind of the crazy side of Gotham, where there's a bunch of like, I guess experimental, um,
Yeah, because
you
wasn't
know,
this set in Arkham Asylum and there was Doctor Strange?
yeah,
Not
Doctor
Doctor
Strange.
Strange.
So,
No, the other Strange, Hugo Strange.
yeah,
Um,
Hugo Strange, who is technically a doctor.
yeah. That's why I always get
Oh,
they're
but he
both
usually goes
Stranges.
by Doctor Hugo Strange.
Yeah,
It is very funny because I've made that mistake as well.
it's
So
so
don't
close.
worry.
It's ridiculous. But Yeah, at that point, that's when they started to kind of focus more, I guess, on the villain and their villain's journey. Because I think before it was kind of like the villains are kind of against each other, but Gordon was kind of it was kind of relating always back to Gordon. I think in the first
Hmm.
season, like he
And
was
his
very much
story.
the main character of that story. And I
Yeah,
think in season two,
exactly.
that's when they got a little bit more of the villains in. I think that's where they recast Poison Ivy to make it a little bit more older because they
Older.
just
Yeah,
cause,
there's a lot of retconning of
yeah.
Poison Ivy. It's like the weirdest part of the show is that, they have her kind of younger than Selena, and then she kind of falls into like she gets touched by this man who has like the ability to age people. And then she becomes like a teen, like a young adult, and then becomes like an actual adult. Meanwhile, like Selena throughout the whole series is only like, obviously only aged like 5 years, right?
Yeah, and
Um,
I think that's part of this show's growing pains, where it's like they clearly didn't think it out as much. Where they're just like, we want these characters, but they're not built up, so let's show the building up of it. But they're just like, crap, we can't do it because of this, so we have to find a reason to do it. So there was a lot
mhm.
of like, that's why that whole season two had that growing pains where it's like, now we're going to focus on this to get to this point, and now this is where the show technically maybe should have started to almost where a lot of these characters are built up. That's where all the kind of like that's when a lot of the supernatural kind of stuff started to semi happen because I think the first season very much grounded, very much like the Dark Knight almost, where it's been pretty much a police drama, just with a guy who's
Mhm.
dressed like a bat. And this one is just Jim Gordon. So I think in the second season with Doctor Hugo Strange, that's when they started to get more of the powers, a little bit more of the supernatural, and I think that's when, and that's the thing. I like the second season from what I remember, set in
Yeah,
prison, having a prison break and Arkham break and things like that. That was pretty cool.
yeah. There's certain episodes that are just kind of establishing a lot of the characters. Like, they introduce like, Mr. Freeze. They introduce Mad. Oh, maybe Mad Hatter. I think is actually in the next city. Sorry, in the next
Next season, yeah, I
season
remember correct.
rather.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, there's a lot of characters. I think you also see the kind of the fall and the rise of the Riddler. I kind of really liked it. I think there's a lot of characters who, if I had like a kind of a canon origin, I would like their canon origin to kind of be very similar to how it is in Gotham. Like, for example, I like that the Riddler was someone who worked at GCPD, and he was like kind of like a normal guy or like a high functioning sociopath who kind of becomes crazy and gives into these kind of psychopathic like instincts and that he's kind of has, and he kind of develops persona, this secondary persona as the Riddler. You kind of see Penguin kind of striking out on his own and being a mob boss himself, and it's an interesting season overall. But it also kind of moves on. I the concept of like the Joker. They call him the Red Hood, right? Like that's the Red Hood gang, and they kind of introduce, ooh, is the Joker like a persona? Is it like an evil entity? Who knows? Again, they're kind of playing around with the concept.
Or even
Season
introduction of what is it? Like, he's in the circus or whatever his name is. Uh, Jeremiah, and like how
well, Jeremiah is introduced in
but isn't it
I,
like isn't it season one? But at some point, but like
no, no, no,
no
no.
one knew who he was, and then they started to be like, okay, now he's the Joker now. So
No, he was introduced much later. He was introduced in like season 3 as like some kind of circus pest. That part is correct, that
yeah,
he's like a circus guy. And then he kind of becomes he escalates. And I think it is in season 3 because that's when we get like the Mad Hatter. Also, the other thing is like, there is also this like weird relationship with like Bruce Wayne kind of being involved, but I think it kind of suffers from something that the Venom movie suffers from in that Venom the movie exists purely on the basis that Spider-Man. So it's very weird when you see certain characters without the very thing that inspired them to exist in the first place.
mm.
And it's very strange when you also have that character, but then also significantly younger than the characters that he eventually fights, right? Like he's going to be like is the people he fights are going to be in their 40s by the time he hits like his early 20s, right? And that's not kind of Batman's go. He doesn't necessarily fight geriatrics in like like what some people would consider his prime, like like late 20s, early 30s is like kind of I think is technically considered Batman's prime.
Yeah.
Um, for in terms of experience and his physical abilities. And yeah, and like it's kind of season 3 is about the Mad Hatter and how his sister has this really infectious blood that makes people crazy. He wants to kind of make other people crazy. That's kind of like the basis for that particular episode. I think in between there's also a bunch of other stuff, including the introduction of Ra's al Ghul.
Yeah, there's a
Um,
lot of side stuff building up to the 4th season, which very much is the Ra's al Ghul season. But I think even overall, I feel like season 3 is probably my favorite, if I remember correctly, because I think I like the Mad Hatter stuff, but on top of that, I think I very much like the relationship stuff between Jim Gordon and the chick who's a
Lee.
yeah, Lee.
Lee. Yeah.
I like that stuff, and I like the whole like wedding, that the whole wedding thing. He's kind of like the scorn lover type of person, and kind of shattering that kind of relationship almost.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that built up where it showed even to the season finale where the two dynamics of this character is very much different from season 1 all the way to onwards to later on where it's fractured and it kind of stays that way in a sentence for a very long time, and I think it took a lot of effort to kind of keep it that way. So I very much liked the character relationships between those characters with that.
Yeah. Lee in the comics is a much older woman who kind of is like Batman's doctor. Like when he has some serious surgery or something that he needs, like he goes and sees her. Rather than doing something in public, right? So obviously, they need to have some characters to kind of, have some raunchy romance with Jim Gordon, who, by the way, I think it's Ryan. I forget the last name, but I know him because he used to be on the OC. I remember watching this show initially and thinking, I don't know if I can like imagine him as anything other than the main character from the OC. But I think he ultimately does do the best that he can with what he's given and the script that he's given for the show. And he does definitely have like this kind of inspiring personality. He does sell hard like the notion of Jim Gordon being this like person who wants to do good for the city of Gotham constantly and puts his life on the line all the time for it. So things that people admire.
Yeah, it's
Season
stuff. It's
4,
something what Jon Snow would do. Just saying.
but very much so. Season 4 kind of, has aspects of, what is it? Penguin becomes the mayor. There's all these other kind of subplots that are happening. Penguin becomes rich, and then he finds his real family. Has his mother die? There's all this stuff
There's a
about
betrayal from his mother and his like best friend. Riddler basically starts hating on Penguin because they could have an on off type of friendships type of stuff going on. We have the whole Ra's al Ghul situation as well.
there's like Butch and there's like Azrael. That was a thing.
Oh
Azrael,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
that
The
was
whole
another thing.
Azrael
I
thing.
think that was season 2 actually. That whole Azrael thing. Which yeah, I kind of found like a bit boring. Honestly speaking, but I did like the sister and her kind of how she kind of stays around and she kind of becomes like the pseudo inspiration for or the pseudo mentor for Catwoman because she uses like a whip and eventually like Selena kind of learns how to use a whip in the TV as the show progresses. Um, you also had like Butch who later becomes like Solomon Grundy, or the show's version of Solomon Grundy.
Which I thought was
Uh,
fine.
yeah,
Solomon Grundy was never a villain where I'm like, oh man, what a
no,
good
not
villain.
really.
You know.
Yeah, with a good interpretation, like it's interesting for the Gotham. You also had like the big status quo change of like Lee being like a mob queen or like a
Like a
boss
nurse. Like yeah, she's kind of
nurse
a boss
boss
of her own
mob
little
boss.
area. Even like Barbara started to kind of
Yeah,
get her
becomes
stuff as well, where she had like her own little club and everything. Like after like what season 3 onwards. So
mhm.
they kind of established this thing where very much like if they'd kind of started from there, this thing could have like they could have easily kept them going for a few seasons if they needed to. Um,
Yeah, maybe. I think I'm gonna give more towards the end of what I think they should have done with this show. But I think I kind of like season 4. Yeah, maybe season 3, season 4 kind of have like the kind of cool stuff. And I think towards like the end of season 3 and like the beginning of season 4, you're kind of introduced to Jeremiah and his brother Jerome, which of course the Joker has a identical twin brother. Of course he does. One of them is like a psychopath, and the other one is like a brilliant minded like architect, and very much in like kind of in line of the comic book series Dark Knight's Metal. There is like the Batman Who Laughs, which is essentially a Batman who killed the Joker, and the Joker has this toxin, this Joker toxin that basically gets released when his heart stops functioning, and this makes the target become Jokerized, and so it basically forms like a Joker style Batman, and very much in a similar way. Um, Jeremiah, who was like the original kind of Joker s character, gets like a final revenge against his brother by infecting him with the same kind of agent he was infected with, making him like this intelligent but then also psychopathic version of the Joker. It's kind of like this like 10 layers. There's a lot of things to unpack in regards to it, but he starts planting bombs everywhere. That fails, and then he works with Ra's al Ghul again. He's back. There's a whole thing, and at the same time, Bruce, he's so young. The kid is like, I like the kid, but they should have got like another actor to do something like a 5 years later, and he's like older,
yeah,
and he does that. That's what I wish they kind of did with this show, like that they kind of had a little bit more Batman and less like this little boy, kind of not doing
because
anything
that's the thing. I
except
think
towards
like
the
yeah,
end.
in season 4 and obviously season 5, but in season 4 that's when I think even like late season 3 that's when they really started to ramp up the whole like kid Batman thing, where it's like he's
Mm.
learning lessons. He's learning self defense. He knows about the Batcave sort of. Like, there's a lot of like stuff like that, and
That
it's
kind
like,
of come out
yeah,
of
and I
it.
think at season 4 that's when he had the whole like it's not a bat suit. He just had like the mask or whatever the hell
Yes,
he was
well,
wearing.
there was a suit. There was a suit involved. It just looked really janky, you
Yeah, that
know.
was weird. Yeah, the mask. That's what I was saying. The mask was just weird.
Uh,
And but yeah,
um.
that's what I'm
Oh,
saying. Like
but
that's when he started to do that, and I feel like I could like he like from what I could see, he could relatively do the action scenes. Okay, it's
I
not
don't
like
think it's really him in the action scene. So
well that
I don't.
maybe because like if I remember,
I
I don't know. I have to look
Does
back
he
because
do his
like
own stunts? I don't think
because there
so.
was things where I'm like I could see semi fighting, and they didn't cut away so much where I'm like that's obviously like not him. But I thought he did okay. Like obviously the girl who did Selena Kyle, like clearly it's a stunt double, but I think she held her own as well when it came
Oh
to
yeah,
those
I
sort of
think
things.
I think I think the actress. The thing is, the actress who plays Catwoman, I think, is um much older than the actor who plays
Bruce Wayne, yeah.
that Bruce Wayne. But don't quote me on that.
No, I think I think it
I'd
pretty much is like it has to be.
and yeah, so like yeah, there's like a big thing that happens where again, like Ra's al Ghul gets killed, but he comes back and he's like, oh, I'm gonna the test that I have is I'm gonna put Gotham in this test that since you love Gotham so much, and he kind of blows up all the bridges and all the ports of entry in Gotham and basically isolates it. And essentially, season 5 is kind of like a loose adaptation of No Man's Land, where in the comic, like basically Gotham is considered a no man's land, like just like a dangerous area, and the it basically leads to like the American government kind of like sanctioning it off from the rest of the country, and Batman in the meantime is trying to like control order as different gangs and superpowered individuals are carving up lands and a lot of like gang activity and stuff, which basically describes what this season is. It's basically you know uh what's his face, the detective. I'm
What,
gonna call him
Bullock?
Rhino. Not Bullock. The main guy.
What, James
The
Gordon?
yeah, James Gordon.
I'm
Jim
like,
Gordon,
wait,
James
I'm like,
Gordon.
wait a second, what?
I'm forgetting his name. Yeah, so yeah, Jim trying to like recontrol Gotham from the criminal elements around Gotham, and kind of slowly coming around and allying with like his old ex-wife and all these other things, building up his romance again with Lee. Even after like all that stuff that happened, that you mentioned about him killing her fiance and stuff. Again, I think definitely because this is like a half season or like a 12 episode um, run, it's significantly shorter. And they try and like jam in a lot of things, like they introduce concept of Bane, um, although very 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 different. And yeah, like it's an interesting season, and I kind of wish there were more shows that kind of do these kind of episodes where it's like the overall plot is kind of planned, and none of the episodes kind of felt like filler per se. I don't know if
Hmm.
you agree with me.
No, yeah, I
um
very much felt like it did progress the plot, like every single type of thing, and it's like I feel like that's the problem with, I guess, normal network television versus like a kind of like a cable exclusive type thing, because like they have to fill out that
they have to
24
pad it,
episode time slot, so they're just like, okay, we'll have to do this and we have to do that and we have
but
to do this and
but
that.
even but even like but even like Netflix TV shows, right? Like
As we mentioned before, yeah,
they'll
the Marvel ones, they had that problem as
yeah
well. It's like
yeah
these stories
exactly.
are perfect. Like those stories are very much like perfect in like a maybe 8 episode chunk. I feel like the thing is
But then
that,
they pad it out,
yeah,
yeah.
because I think it's one of those things where it's just networks, or like they're just like every TV show has to have this like before.
Yeah.
I don't know who started it. It could have been Lost again, going back to that at some point, or like Dexter, or like Breaking Bad. But I feel like at some point someone was like, you know what, it's a perfect format for viewing stuff, 12 to 13 episodes, and I think everyone
Mm.
just started to kind of replicate that. You know,
Anime maybe, who knows.
maybe, but that's what I'm saying. Like before, it always used to be 24 episodes, and
Hmm.
you'd get shows like Buffy, which are good, but it would have been so much better if it was that solid 12 episodes that focused more on the story that they wanted to tell, rather than just like monster of the week, plot
Hmm.
episode, monster of the week, monster of the week. So I feel like, yeah, it kind of had that type of thing, and it's like, and I feel like the last season of Gotham very much was like, we're gonna go 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 go, and it almost kind of felt like it was going really fast, where I'm like, we're gonna do that jump cut what they do at the first episode of the first season, where they're just like defending
Hmm.
the police station, and that kind
Yeah.
of happens, and all of a sudden, bam, we're like in that future kind of worlds, only for like one episode,
Yeah.
um, which I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah, because it is definitely.
I'm like, you could have done 24 episodes, and then the last 12 doing a whole Batman thing, and I think that would have
Mm.
been pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I don't think they wanted to really do the Batman thing. It's much like the Smallville problem where they didn't want to have him in the suit, even though I think they tried to get I think Tom I forget his full name, but like the actor who plays Superman in the Smallville TV series. They wanted him in the suit, but I guess they didn't get him to do it. But yeah, it was an interesting season. It did rush. Um, but I think like if you like the previous seasons, you'll probably enjoy this one because it does kind of wrap up a lot of the stories, and it kind of tries to connect everything back like 5 years later, after kind of Bruce Wayne has kind of disappeared. They got a new actress to play Catwoman, which I found interesting.
Mm.
But that was like the actress's decision. She was like, "Yeah, no, I think it's better, like if we have like someone who kind of looks older to play her. Like, it doesn't make sense that I'd look exactly the same 5 years later
Maybe get
after
that de
Bruce
aging
sees me,
makeup or whatever it was.
or whatever it was." Yeah. And we kind of see the bat suit in its final iteration, and oh, honestly, it looks gross. It looks gross.
It just,
But
but you didn't really see it in action, so.
no, but it doesn't change the fact that it looks gross, and there are better stills of it. Again, I think the big problem with Gotham is that it a lot of what the basis for the show required Batman to exist. And without him existing, it purely adds an element of just having the police having constantly dealing with these superpowered individuals, and Jim kind of stumbling into him and I owe you a favor and oh no, I'm a bad guy now and oh no, I'm really good. It just kind of flip flops between these kind of things without actually doing all the kind of typical comic booky investigation and villainous schemes that a lot of the characters would do purely to just get Batman's attention. Like that on its own could be its own episode. Like there's one episode about Scarecrow wanting to get revenge on Batman after the first incident, and that leads to an escalation. And you could even have like because this is what I would have wanted. Yeah. So over wait okay before we talk about what we want, like what did you think about Gotham as a whole, like as a whole, in the past 5 years,
I think
in
it's
five seasons.
I think it's a relatively solid show. Like it obviously has growing pains. It has some things where you might be like that's a little bit of an off chance, or an off thing that they chose, or a decision that they did. But I think overall, I think it's a pretty good show, especially when you consider like when you first hear the news about like they're making a prequel TV show about Batman villains, but without Batman. It was very much it very much had that whole you're skeptical of it. You're like, oh, I don't know, that's a little bit weird. But then it grew into it, and I think it had its own kind of good. It had its own vibe that like I think like not many TV shows have, and I think Gotham had a very specific vibe where it's like it's very fun and friendly, kind of like a CW show, but at the same time it was very ultra violent and very adult. So it had that really good mix of that, and I think overall the show was I think a good kind of entry, especially if like you're into Batman things, you're into and you want to know more about certain characters or just about more. You don't really see much of the world in I guess movie or TV show media about Batman or about the expanded universe of Gotham. I feel like this is a pretty good show if you want to get some more supplementary material for Batman and these types of rogues galleries of these types of characters. So I feel like yeah, I think it's worth a watch if you have the time to kind of watch it. It's not the worst thing in the world, but at the same time, it does some questionable things. But I think that was more for me earlier season stuff that I really didn't like as much. So yeah, go watch.
I kind of agree with you with the notion that I think I would recommend this show to people who enjoy DC content. Again, we're kind of biased on the Pancake Parlay. We took a lot of DC here and there. But I think definitely like if you're not a big comic book fan, and especially if like you watch the first season and just kind of dramatically changes into a superhero kind of drama with like criminal elements and investigation. And it's not going to be Batman doing investigation. It's going to be centered around Jim. I think you should you can give it a go. But if comics aren't your cup of tea, I wouldn't probably necessarily recommend it to people. A lot of the big highlights I like about the show is that it does a very good design for setting. So the fact that the world that they live in is this kind of weird like neo noir kind of ish world, like where they have telephones that are still like kind of like they have the the old school kind of dialing, like where you have to put your finger in, and maybe some people won't see these. I never had one of these but like you put your finger in the hole and you kind of pull it down to get the number that you want to. You have the old like boob tube style TVs, and had all this kind of aesthetic that made it look old. But then, and there were scenes where they had like Tommy guns, especially in the first season. They all had Tommy guns and stuff. But then set in the modern world. I kind of love the aesthetic, and I love the a lot of the actor and actress choices. Like for example, Harvey Bullock. I thought the actor that got to play him was like perfect, like spot on, exactly what you'd expect Harvey Bullock in the comics to kind of be like. You had Catwoman. I really like her actress. Bruce Wayne. I like Bruce Wayne being young Bruce Wayne. I kind of wish they kind of replaced him and became older or something like that. But that's neither here or there. The actor who plays Penguin, probably one of the best
Oh yeah,
iterations of Penguin.
yeah, very much. I didn't
Period.
mention before, but like yeah, Penguin and I think even Riddler, those two,
The Riddler, yeah,
they
and
basically just steal the show, and I feel like as like a lot of TV shows do, they always had their fangirls that go crazy over those two, and I feel like that they pretty much had an impact on the show. I think with those particular characters, and I feel like yeah, like
yeah. I
I think
mean,
even the TV show kind of lasted as long as it did, purely because of those two, the fandom of those two characters almost.
the thing is, you kind of see the rise of Penguin becoming like this henchman to becoming like a full blown mobster, and you kind of follow that journey. Of course, like later in the maybe seasons 4, like in 5, that's not really like the case. He's just kind of there, and he's kind of trying to get power and going through whatever turmoil he is at the time. But I think ultimately, like the actor kind of sells him with like the kind of the walk that he has, like he clearly has like a limp, and he has like the way that they kind of stylize his face, and he's got like a really nice like curved nose to kind of give that look of what Penguin looks like in the comics, which isn't Danny DeVito. Even though like after his Danny does play him in like the movies, they did make the comic a version of him reflect that, but he doesn't usually look like that. So I kind of really like this kind of rebooted look of Penguin, and it
Mm.
does actually show like how ferocious he is as a character. Again, same thing with Edward Nygma, and the actor who plays the Riddler. He does an excellent job at playing this meticulous character, and we watch his journey kind of devolve into madness, and become this kind of serial killer who needs to give his victims like a chance to escape. As I mentioned before, Jeremiah and Jerome, obviously, I think they're played by the same person, but they're excellent in terms of being a interpretation of the Joker that I think a lot of people can get behind. They even do the classic New 52 version of the Joker, where the Joker kind of cuts his skin off and then like staples it on his face and wears it like a mask.
Mm.
So there's a lot of these kind of homages to the comics. Even like Jeremiah Valescu, who's like kind of the second iteration. He like dresses up like he in the like purple suit and with the pale white skin, so he kind of looks a lot like Joker. So a lot of the kind of design choices, like what the characters wear, gives the aesthetic of like as if these characters are coming straight out of the comic book.
Yeah, I very
Um,
much like the costume design of these characters. I feel like it like at the start they were kind of very muted, I guess, but I
Basic,
think,
yeah.
but then when the series got on, I think they got a little bit more detailed and a little bit more like just little small details that were like, okay, yeah, that's kind of cool. Like I always
Mm.
like the Riddler's look in this show, or
I
some of
think
the characters. I think outfits, especially the Joker ones, are always very elaborate, and I always like that type of look.
how they look. I like Ra's al Ghul. I like how he looked. I like Poison Ivy generally in all her iterations kind of look good. There's also yeah, Solomon Grundy, obviously another one that kind of looks good. I'm pretty impressed with how they kind of got him to look the way he does. Did I mention Ra's al Ghul? Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like him. And it's kind of interesting because I think right about the same time they did introduce like Ra's al Ghul in Arrow as well, so they're kind of like chucking this like character in like multiple different places. I liked the BD Wong as Doctor Strange. Sorry,
Dr. Hugo
Hugo Strange,
Strange.
Doctor Hugo Strange, right? Just so we don't confuse people too much. Yeah, because usually, I think Hugo Strange is typically like a white dude, but I really like BD Wong and how he had everything from the like kind of pink tinted glasses that that Hugo Strange wears to like the kind of creepiness he kind of like it looks like. Yeah, BD Wong's really great.
Yeah, he basically plays the exact same character in the Jurassic Park. I mean Jurassic World.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
like an evil scientist type,
yeah.
right?
So I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
yeah, it's the same
basically.
guy. Yeah,
Yeah, like yeah, he's great in like I love him in like I think it was in a Criminal Intent. I think he's in Law and Order: Criminal Intent or SVU, one of those. And I like him in that as well when I used to watch the shows also. But yeah, so I like him. That there's just like a list. Oh, actually, one character which I didn't like was Mr. Freeze. I'm not a big fan of Mr. Freeze with hair and not being bald. It just
Has there
always
been
seems like
any
a really.
interpretation with him with hair while he does have the treatment? Because yeah, I don't
I
know.
think that maybe, but I don't think like to be honest, maybe like the version of Mr. Freeze prior to Heart of Ice, which is the Batman the Animated Series episode, which was like I think won like an Academy Award or
Like it's
something
some sort
along
of
that
Grammy
line.
thing, yeah.
Yeah, no, well, not a
Not the
Grammy,
Grammy. I mean the Emmys or whatever.
Oscar or Emmy or really big award, just because of how excellent the story, aesthetics, design, look, voice acting, everything was for this episode, and it introduced a modern take on, or a then modern mainstream take on Mr. Freeze. So perhaps like prior to that particular episode, Mr. Freeze wasn't this like bold looking dude. But I don't know. It just kind of looked a little bit too extra with like the white hair. But that's like one character out of like so many that they kind of like nail quite correctly. And I think like when you do kind of have these kind of characters who are exotic or like have or flamboyant, like the best thing you can do is just like turn it up to 10 with how they perform, like Mad Hatter. There was like a version of Harley Quinn that got introduced in like the latest season or the end of last season as well. So yeah, they all have like their own unique look. And yeah, I think the look of Gotham um it definitely gets very high ratings for me. But I think like overall, like I think I'd probably give the show like maybe like a 6 or a 6.5. Like I enjoyed watching it, and it is maybe better than like average TV show, but like it's not something that I'm going out and recommending my friend like, oh, you have to watch
Yeah, it's only if you like
Gotham right now.
if you're like
Yeah.
a diehard DC person or you want to know a little bit more DC stuff,
Mhm.
like yeah, it's pretty cool if you want to have something that's a little bit more serialized in the I guess Batman universe. But
Mhm.
at that point you pretty much be like, watch the animated series and kind of its spin-offs and but if you haven't gone from there, I guess try Gotham because it does I think it does some unique stuff. That I don't think not many TV shows
Oh,
do.
you know what? They even introduced the Court of Owls as well, even though they don't play like a really big role in it.
Yeah, and I
Um,
always thought that was really cool. Like, there's a lot of hidden history of Gotham type of thing, and I think
mhm.
that's what the whole intent of this show originally probably was. Where wasn't it they have their own comic book, the GCPD, where it's just normal people doing normal stuff, and I
Mhm.
think that's what they
Yeah.
try to do in the first season, and they're just like, yeah, let's not do that.
Mhm.
But it is what it is.
Yeah. You see, okay, so this is what I actually wanted Gotham to be. And maybe back when we initially did this podcast, I might have mentioned this as well, but that would have been a while ago
Mm-hmm.
now. What I wanted from Gotham was basically a very similar kind of show of what's happening now, but at the same time, you have Batman kind of beginning, or like, well, I didn't mean to make that particular reference, but like, Batman kind of starting out as being the Batman. So, it can lead to like, kind of what they do a little bit in kind of the very last episode of Gotham season 5, where, there is a lot of interaction and fear about this myth of this like demon bat-like entity that goes around scaring the shit out of and beating the crap out of criminals, right? So it's all this kind of like maybe season 1 kind of plays out very similarly, and maybe the people who kind of end up being responsible for Bruce Wayne's death is the Falcone, like the big boss Falcone. I forget his full name. And that kind of leads to like Bruce kind of developing an interest of becoming smarter so he can like solve his parents' murder. But then also think him getting into trouble means like, oh well, I got to get stronger, blah blah blah, and that kind of leads into this 5 years later or 10 years later where he's gone traveling,
Mm-hmm.
he's gone and learn some of the martial arts, but he's not like a perfect being. He still has to like kind of come to terms with like, how is he going to bring about changes to Gotham, and he picks up like being a vigilante, and kind of like very similar to Daredevil season 1, where Daredevil just like ran around in like like not a tracksuit, but like with like a black bandana over his face, and over his eyes, and just like sweatpants or whatever it was, like in these black like robes, not anything
Very
protective. It was
simple.
just something, yeah, very something simple. And if he was trained by ninjas or something like Ra's al Ghul, maybe, he it would justify how he like gets the black aesthetic, and that also leads to maybe Ra's al Ghul actually coming into town for a really good reason, very much like in Batman Begins, where racial Ra's al Ghul kind of comes in to try and take down Gotham for like payback, and that kind of can be something and of a point of contention. But the thing is, the main show doesn't become about Batman. That's the big thing. Batman is only like kind of like a side character, or like an equal main character to Jim, who at the same time is playing it from the Gotham side, so the GCPD side of things. So like when they're talking about like seeing a lead or finding out about a lead, they'll like go in and they'll find out that like Batman's already talked to them or beat the shit out of them
Mm.
for information, and that leads to tension between like the GCPD and Batman, which is already something that kind of generally happens within DC Comics as it is, like where whether like the police respect him or not. More in his early career they didn't. But yeah, it could lead to like some pretty interesting things about how is he gonna be willing to kill? Is he not? Is he okay with paralyzing people? Like that's the kind of thing that I kind of thought would be a far more interesting show, where maybe you might expand the Bat family or something, maybe later. The main thing would be about Jim and his relationship with Batman, and I think that kind of leads to each season maybe be breaking up into like two half seasons, which is kind of like what was already happening, but each half season is maybe dedicated to one villain, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
villain has a plan that Batman and Jim Gordon are constantly trying to uncover, and maybe they get in each other's way, but maybe help each other, and I don't know, make out or some other weird shit. Like there's just
Something for.
something, all right? Just something that kind of has them interacting, rather than like, hey, Bruce Wayne is here, but he is also a 10-year-old boy and cannot do anything, which is basically what every like episode that had Bruce Wayne in it in Gotham, outside of maybe like the last season when they actually got him to really do stuff, felt like, right? I
Yeah.
think it'd be interesting, for example, if you had a like the first season is about the Riddler, right? The first half season is about the Riddler. Or you do something like there's a overarching villain over the season, but there's two like mini villains that break it up, and they all kind of link together by the end. And then after you're done with those three villains, they can just kind of reappear in whatever random episodes to either move the plot along or be an adherence or even a future ally to Batman. Who knows? But if you structure like each kind of season like that, and have there be like a mystery with the odd fight and stuff like that, I think that honestly is the Batman show that I kind of wanted out of them. But where it still kind of balances the kind of the cop drama alongside of the superhero stuff, which is eventually where they tried to go anyways, but they just do a half-assed job of it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I don't know. I think that was part of the whole. They just had. They thought of their direction a little bit late. Like they were like, we want to do one thing and then we want to do another thing, and you can kind of see it in the even just the showrunners that they had, or some episodes where like there are some episodes where it would be much more of a darker, more mature tone, and then other times it was very much in this very much weird, jokey tone. So I feel like they didn't even get the tone right until later on. But yeah, I think that was the show has its ups and downs, but
mm,
as mentioned before, I think it's at least a solid show, and I think at the start they were very nervous of what they could and could not do. Like I remember, I think there was interviews when they were at Comic-Con being like, yeah, we want to introduce Harley Quinn, but I don't think we can because this was at the height of like the DC stuff.
Mhm.
And then then later on, they like last season, they're just like, now, yeah, screw it. We're just gonna put her in there. We're not gonna call her Harley
The whole
Quinn, but we're basically just gonna put her in there anyways.
Yeah, like she's basically Harley Quinn. The one thing I actually didn't like about her costume is like the thing that she has her lipstick. I don't know if you ever noticed this. She has the lipstick, and like on the top right hand would be like black, and the bottom left hand would be black as well. But there isn't a corresponding red. It's just left as like a white or like a nude lipstick color, and I'm like, it just looks weird. It's like, why not just make it red and fit your entire black, red, white aesthetic? You know, it feels like a weird thing that they decided to do, or maybe I'm just blind. Um, but yeah, like again, that's the kind of show that it could have been, and I think it would have been far more successful. And I think a lot of fans would have really loved it. But I think now that we're getting and I guess to kind of move into like one of the other topics that we can go and talk about is kind of like the future of these kind of DC properties and where um DC as a whole is kind of moving towards because with Gotham finished they're being more open with where they can put Batman, which is currently going to be more than likely in Batwoman,
Mm-hmm.
which the trailer kind of recently came out. What did you think about the trailer?
I did not like this show. If you remember correctly, like
Oh, okay.
it's so far from what I've seen, it doesn't look something that I'd be interested in. And obviously I give shows benefit of the doubt because I remember, you know, I saw Ruby Rose,
Mhm.
in what is it,
In the crossover.
in the crossover. I'm like, yeah, she did a pretty
Yeah.
good job. She's doing her thing. I like the look of what they did with Gotham. I like kind of the story setup plan that they had kind of had for it as well.
Mhm.
And it got me hyped to see more. Her fighting as well. I'm like, yeah, it looks pretty good. Her costume looks pretty good. But I think the trailer, from what they focused on and what they want to show for this season, it just doesn't look interesting. Obviously,
Okay.
I'll watch a lot. I'll watch it, but at the current moment, I feel like I thought it was going to be something different. Or
Oh,
some
okay. Well,
something
actually, I'm
something more.
interested.
I think something more. I don't know, like I think it's because I have this notion in mind that like Batman, certain things have this particular tone or this particular feeling to it, and I feel I did not get this at all from the trailer. Maybe it's the way the trailer's cut, but I felt like it wasn't Gotham the way I know it. I don't know. It could be a different take, but at the current moment, I'll watch it, but I'm not that
I'm
as
inter- I'm
interested.
I'm actually interested. So what was it that kind of like when you say it wasn't the Gotham that you thought it was? What was what about it kind of like surprised you or took you aback compared to maybe something like Gotham, the TV show that we were just talking about?
I think it very much is the aesthetic part of it. I don't know. I have that, as we mentioned before, that weird '40s type of feel to like a modern day equivalent. Um, something like that. I don't know who the I think I also have to know like who the villain is and what kind of the general plot is
Oh
for this
well,
show.
I think I already know who.
Mm.
I'm not too sure if it is if it is correct, but if you look up, it's called. I think she's called White Rabbit, and essentially she's a Alice in Wonderland inspired villain. They kind of turned her down in the actual trailer. She just has like this mask, um, and yeah, like that's kind of it. And like you see, there's like another character who like runs away that gets into a bit of a fight with um I think it's a woman who later becomes the Question. I forget, she's like a Montoya.
Mm-hmm.
She's actually uh in Gotham as well, but they introduce her as a special agent working for the FBI or something like that. Which is a bit of a shame because Montoya is uh, like a classic character that it's usually like Montoya and Harvey kind of doing the beat together. Because usually like Jim Gordon is like the older one compared to everyone else, right?
Yeah.
Whereas they kind of de-age him in Gotham to have them be like the buddy cop team. Uh, but but yeah, yeah. So the character's known as White Rat. I'm not really too sure what her deal will be in the actual show itself.
Are they gonna do
But
much? Like I don't even know if they're gonna do much supernatural stuff in this show or not. Like that. Those are questions that I'd like to know. If it's something like if it's a little bit more, I guess, Arrow or a little bit more Flash. If you catch my drift, it's kind of like in that kind of perspective.
I think on yeah. Oh, okay, yeah. I can see I can see what you mean. Like, are they gonna have like really uh like because Batman usually deals with like Flash level villains, while also dealing with like Arrow style villains. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, like I'm very curious of like what they're doing with this show. I think that's
I think
my whole thing of like, are you gonna do a more realistic take? Because like the whole point is like that like basically Batwoman like is basically replacing Arrow.
Batman.
Well, Batman,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah,
Arrow.
yeah. That's
Like
correct. Yeah, and Arrow. Yes,
in the meta
taking the time
universe,
slot.
he's basically
Yeah,
replacing them.
taking the time slot. Yeah, because if a lot of people don't know, so the recent season of Arrow has actually recently finished. Same thing with the Flash. I mean, have you caught up with those particular shows?
Yes, I've caught up with all of them,
What did you think of both of the finales?
um, I almost feel like like especially with the Arrow one, they are planning. I like obviously with the crossover, but it very much feels like this is like
Arrow babies in the future or
no.
whatever it is.
Well, there's two things. First of all, with the crossover with Arrow, I'm like clearly this is ending. They already said it's ending, so it feels like that's very much a finale. And then they were trying to do the whole thing of a spin off of like the future Arrow stuff, which is
Yeah,
like I don't know if it would hold as a TV show. I don't know if they're
I
trying to
don't.
do it or
I don't think that. I honestly don't think they're trying to do it.
I
I
think it's
think
just
it's
one
a
of those
big
things where they're
mistake.
just trying to fill up time for the episodes. Then,
Yeah, 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 definitely. Like, I mean, it's their interpretation or their new version of instead of 5 years ago or 1 year. Like, yeah, well, every season it's 5 years ago because every season is is 1 year, but 1 year after, right? Whereas in the big twist with some of the later seasons is oh well, I think the one with in season 6 it becomes like 1 year ago from like someone else's perspective, right?
mm, yeah,
Oh, no, 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 no. Actually, no, no, no. I remember what the gimmick was for season 6. The gimmick for season 6 was it was a 1 year later, but since season 6, it's based on Arrow's first year as the Arrow. So it's from 5 years ago during his initial year as the Arrow in Star City. And it's like these hidden stories of how he was like framed for killing the main villain's like father. Um, Arrow season 5, by the way, one of the better seasons of Arrow. I think like it's got to be like season 2, season 5 than season 1, in my opinion.
yeah.
But I'll have to like kind of do that. Have a better think about it during my review for Arrow once that finishes, which would be very sad because I kind of found that the finale was pretty sad. Because again, he kind of the thing is, the main character Stephen Amell, he does a great job at like, he does good like emotional acting when he needs to. But it kind of seems like every time he kind of does something, he just can't relax at all. Like there's always something else that he has to like do, and he makes a deal with this entity known as the Monitor, basically a all powerful being who watches over the multiverse, and essentially warns him of a threat to the multiverse, and that he says that he wants to save like the Flash and Supergirl in one of the big crossovers, but in exchange he has to sacrifice something equivalent, which in his case will be himself. Now, the other big thing is a lot of people are thinking the other person who might need to sacrifice themselves or end up sacrificing themselves is Diggle,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't see Diggle in the future.
Well, not only that, but I
So
think the actor said he doesn't really want to come back either, or like as in
who
like
did? Oh, Diggle?
yeah. But the show is ending anyway, so I don't know
Oh, the
why
show's
everyone.
ending, so it
Yeah,
doesn't
I don't know why
doesn't really
everyone's
have a
like, yeah,
choice.
we don't want to come back, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean Felicity isn't coming back for next season either. So like it's kind of like, all right, yeah, that's why they kind of let her go into hiding next season, because that's the kind of place that they kind of wrote themselves into. But yeah, like I kind of the plot of season 7 was kind of a little bit all over the place. I must admit, like they're kind of they're kind of pulling back the villain from the previous season, the dragon guy, but then they immediately like kill him and introduce like Arrow's like half sister Emiko, who is actually more of a bigger character in the comics, and is a canon sister of Oliver Queen, whereas Thea is like a TV um uh, like canon relative of Arrow. But I kind of like their relationship, and it kind of like sucks that in the end they kind of like don't really do the Emiko character much justice. They introduce like every season they seem to escalate, like, oh, they have the League of Assassins, and oh, then we have Hive, who are more stronger and more powerful than the League of Assassins, and oh no, but then we have these other people who are known as the Ninth Circle, who nobody's ever heard of. Like, it's like, wait, that's who the League of Assassins, Like,
I think they wrote themselves in the corner. Like, oh man, like
very much so,
they're just like crap.
very
We
much.
can't have the most powerful if the most powerful's gone.
And it's really weird because then you have like people like Wild Dog fighting against the League of Assassins. It's just like, that's ridiculous. Yeah, it's all dumb. But ultimately, I kind of look forward to what the next season is, because it's essentially going to be um just Stephen Amell and maybe Diggle going on a multiverse like trip to, like, I guess, save the multiverse. Like, they're gonna maybe find people from alternate universes or multiverses to help them along the way. I don't know. It seems like an interesting idea um, to kind of wrap up, or maybe do like a, they're kind of doing the end game thing, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
where they're going back in time to kind of to key moments or key events, and gathering like the gang for one for his ultimate death, which is kind of imminent. Spoilers. I think that's got
Yeah,
to be
I
allowed.
think they pretty much set that up. That or someone else is dying, but someone's dying.
Someone's dying. And Flash, on the other hand, I kind of thought again, it seems like the show is a little bit all over the place. I kind of like the villain, like how it was like a serial killer who has the ability to negate powers, right? Um, but they never were really consistent on when he's able to like use his powers. And then there's like the daughter who comes, sorry, the niece who comes from the future, who has this like the who doesn't use the dagger. She has like natural um
Powers.
powers to nullify people's ability, but then they're able to kind of neutralize these guys with using their own power. It's really inconsistent. But the thing is, the one thing that I did like about the season was how it all related back to Thorn, right? He just does this like fifth dimensional chess move to get them to destroy the kind of artifact which was like strapped to his chest and was the only thing preventing him from using his powers. I kind of really liked that as a like a plot point, and it's kind of interesting. I've heard some maybe next season, um, because they kind of open up the concept of by the end of the season, because of all the events and the kind of erasure of their daughter Dawn from the timeline, which was kind of sad and pretty emotional, all things
Yeah,
considered.
yeah. I thought she
But
was a okay character when they introduced.
better than
Yeah,
better than Wally.
yeah, very much so.
They did my boy Wally really bad, where they kind of did a really good job doing this kind of mother daughter, father son kind of relationship with their future daughter. The thing that's really interesting is even not Zoom, the Reverse Flash says that in the future Barry actually has two twins and not Dawn. So it kind of seems to imply that, oh, they're like in some weird alternate timeline that happened probably because Barry went back in time to save his mum and caused Flash. And that's the reason why Dawn exists. But now that they change the timeline again, it might mean that he might end up having twins. Who knows? But the thing that's kind of important is that Flash, the time in which Barry disappears has decreased to 2019. So I think the big thing that might happen, you know how every season how they have a new Wells, like they have a new person
To replace the Wells character.
the Wells of currently. Um, I think, and it would be very interesting if the Wells that they end up working with is the Reverse Flash for next season.
So it's like a inconspicuous thing where he comes back almost, but no one would have known.
Well, no. It's more like he comes back and they know he's back,
Uh,
but they have to work with him in order to try and save Barry.
yeah.
And I think the Reverse Flash kind of is the best villain from the Flash TV series. I think season 1 is kind of consistently the best season. Again, it does have like the best plot and it's well written and stuff like that. Again, it's really simple but does an excellent job at trying to keep you guessing at who the Reverse Flash is and stuff like that. So I think it would be pretty interesting, like trying to figure out like how do we save Barry? How do we do this? And then have that also all be related to the big multiverse crisis event that happens with Arrow and the gang. I kind of really like I like the season finales and I like the shows conceptually, but I definitely believe Arrow is a show that's kind of running out of ideas and
Yeah,
where
they
they
already
can
pulled
take
so much
certain
from the
characters.
Batman Wells, so it's like, in
Yeah.
general, they're kind of like, hey, what are we doing from here? Even like the Flash, I feel like it's almost kind of hitting its limit. Where I'm like, you could do a lot more different cool things with it. I just feel like they didn't do much of an impact. You know, something like the what is it, Flashpoint? They didn't really do much with
Mhm.
Flashpoint, and I felt like that was gonna be a big deal. Or
Yeah,
um,
Flashpoint was only something like an aesthetic they changed for like an episode, and then they deal with the consequences or whatever. Yeah, I definitely feel you. They don't want to make too big of a change, but
but yeah,
I guess we'll
I
have
feel
to
like,
see.
as we mentioned kind of before, it's like, since DC now has their own streaming service, maybe possibly they're gonna change or like wrap a lot of things up. Even though like they have
Mhm.
the Batwoman series happening, I feel like that
Yeah.
this might even be a weird ploy where they've got the multiverse theory. Maybe that introduces the Netflix stuff, but I completely doubt it though, because it feels like it's
I
very,
don't know about.
because like
I
they
think
could do it, but it'd be very
well,
complicated.
the thing is one of the things that people say the reason why it seemed kind of rushed was how everything was put together with the Flash, which I definitely understand because I do feel like there's a lot of writing inconsistencies and stuff that happens, and certain events just seem really out of place and irrelevant, such as like the evil Killer Frost family that they tried to her evil father tried to make. It just seemed like stuff that's kind of really irrelevant to the whole plot and was again more packed. Um, I think the thing is, there's going to be new showrunners for The Flash, and I think they tried to wrap up a lot of things to allow for it to be a clean slate moving forward with the new showrunners and what they want to do with it. So I guess we'll have to see. But I definitely see that being the case. Like after the whole crisis event, it might lead to like a bit of a status quo shift where something different happens in the Flash series, and Arrow doesn't exist anymore, but Batman does, and so that kind of retcons like maybe his interaction with like the League of Assassins, or allows like I think probably a good villain to have in Batwoman would be Talia al Ghul or Nissa al, who were both once enemies slash allies of the characters in Arrow, with I think Nissa Al Ghul being Oliver's uh, bride to be, which I always really find funny. She appears, she still continuously calls Oliver her husband even after he's like
it's
married
very
to
awkward. It's like, oh
Felicity.
god.
Yeah, I found it really fun, and she does, and the thing is like kind of like pretty clear that like I think Nissa Al Ghul is like a lesbian because she's well she could be bi I guess technically. Um, but like yeah, because she's also in love with like Sarah as well. So there's all that other kind of stuff. So I just find it funny that like it could be like she's a lesbian, but she still calls him her husband, like just to like either tease him or just to like make it awkward for him because because like he feels uncomfortable about it. Um,
It's like I only just did this just to get something done, but now it's a real thing.
yeah, exactly. And then you have Talia, I think is later revealed to be somebody who teaches Oliver how to fight. Like I think I forget in what, but that was something that is revealed. I think in season 6. Sorry, season 5. I think. Because she's behind like the big revenge as well. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see if like Batwoman ends up like fighting because again, it gives them the opportunity to have like a they typically do these things where with a lot of like female superheroes where they'll have like a female villain that they'll fight. Which sometimes I kind of find really lazy because sometimes you can have good villains that are not like that can be the opposite sex if that makes sense.
Mm.
And that's fine. But yeah, I think like maybe someone like Talia al Ghul or Nissa, something of that ilk might be a pretty interesting thing. But I think to answer one of the questions that you were asking before, I think it's going to have a combination of hopefully her doing like detective work and then alongside like fighting villains of various different levels. Because that's essentially what Batman does. He's just there as like a cleanup crew of whatever like weird thing has come into Gotham. He's gonna try and come up with some bat gadget to take him out.
So it's
Um,
the bat way. But yeah,
it's a
overall,
bat way.
overall, like I feel like the CW stuff is kind of slowing down. Like I feel like maybe Flash has like
Mhm.
maybe 1 to 2 more seasons. Apparently, Legends might be ending after like one more
Legend
season.
Legends should have ended like last season. Like I'm watching it, but man,
Yeah,
like
it's just a bunch of random stuff. It's very different and like, and then Supergirl. I've heard this season's pretty good, but like
I
also
yeah
ratings
I
are not so good. So it's kind of like it's probably on the down there.
yeah you know what Supergirl hasn't finished yet. But I will give you my review for season 4, season 4. Because as much as like it definitely really surprises me in regard to again some of the writing inconsistencies that they have for it, but a lot of the ideas that they kind of explore, and a lot of the direction that they take the Supergirl characters and certain characters throughout the show is pretty interesting. Like for example, like you know, um, I mentioned about Agent Liberty and also Lex Luthor. Both of those characters are villains, and they each have like an episode dedicated to their origins. Um, and it's excellent at being able to kind of show you how these guys, came to where they are. Maybe not so much Lex. Lex's origin is like I'm an asshole, and this is how I was able to manipulate it. That just goes to show he's like kind of genius. Whereas the Agent Liberty one kind of shows you like how he like kind of led to his descent into I guess political extremism, which is like one of the kind of things that talk about within the show. And it's really cool. I kind of like it. But then at the same time, they have Brainiac as a side character because there's like the nerdy character who you know how every
All
superhero
these
team has
CW
a
shows have to have the nerdy character.
yeah the nerdy character. So the nerdy character in who's like Toyman's son in the in Supergirl. Basically, in the future, they have a Brainiac related robot virus that infects the future, and so it's dangerous for Brainiac 5 to go back, but instead Win goes to try and help them. And so for this season, Brainiac 5 is acting like the brain, the nerdy guy in the show. But the cool thing is they're introducing him as maybe potentially becoming a villain because obviously he has Brainiac, in him. in some capacity. So yeah, it's really cool some of the stuff that they may or may not do with the show. So yeah, but I agree. It's probably one of the weakest shows, but I think this season does kind of up the interesting factor of it,
Mm-hmm.
compared to some of the, again, because again, maybe it's because they know for the chopping block, so they're kind of going with something that's bold and different, compared to maybe some of the other shows which are a little bit more, yeah, run of the mill, generic or interesting. I think like Legends of Tomorrow usually has the more creative show, yeah, less story focused.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, hey, let's do something. Hey, let's have an excuse to dress up as cowboys or
They
Egyptians
basically
or
just went
so,
to the, what is it, the vault of like the costume place. Like, oh, what do we have? And then let's just
yeah,
make an episode
exactly.
out of it. But yeah, either way, I feel like the DC stuff, it's moving in a very much different direction. Same with the even Marvel stuff. I feel like we're entering a new age
Mm.
of TV, pretty much, especially after Game of Thrones is,
Streaming,
yeah, especially
yeah,
ended.
independent streaming services, yeah.
Yeah, it's the future. But yeah,
Mm.
that's actually going to be us for this week. Remember, you can always listen to us and stream it on Spotify, as well as download the episodes on iTunes, Libsyn, and on live streaming on the YouTube channel Marketing Movies. So until next time, maybe Superman is, Henry Cavill, but no one will ever know until in the future. So, see you guys.
Catch ya.